run through our college, and we are planning more. So yes, it's basically ongoing support for our colleagues.
That's really good. And the follow-up question is: do you anticipate a surge in demand for prescription vapes under the new system?
Look, talking to members of the community already, I think that people, the people are able to access themselves nicotine replacement therapy over the counter in supermarkets and pharmacists. But I think that certainly people have come to me for advice. I think there will be people when if the enforcement is in place and it's not available outside your school or on the way to university when you're walking past it, those kind of enforcement measures play a really important role because that availability is one of the key things that makes people access it. And obviously the Commonwealth has a role in stopping importation. But it is, I think there will be certainly some people will present to health professionals for assistance and we're there to help.
And what since you're a professional field, what's the nicotine's effect in the short term on a person and the long term effect?
Okay. We used to say every cigarette is doing you damage, and actually every suck on a vape does some damage. And basically, it's the nicotine. With the vape, you don't obviously get some of the other ingredients. But again, we don't know the ingredients of vapes. But certainly, the effect on blood pressure, pulse is immediate. And again, the kind of midterm levels that we're seeing are again escalating addiction to nicotine. Insomnia, because makes people more alert. We also, again, people seeing dental problems as well. There's certainly the poisonings of young babies who access e-cigarettes is very real and seen in children's hospitals and poisonings line. I think that the long-term effects we don't know. Obviously in the States, it's different carrier fluid. There have been what we call EVALI, young people ending up in intensive care related to vaping. And we have seen I believe there have been hospitalisations in Australia, rare, but again, it's the long-term effects that we just don't know about.
And with this prescription model and the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, very important organisation in all this. So what role do you think the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners play in the long term?
Yeah, and look, we've got an ongoing role in providing support and training for our colleagues. We are like I said, we make the main national guidelines on smoking and nicotine cessation. We do, and I think obviously training at all levels. We are supporting the health of the community. We have a very strong role in prevention.
Thanks. No further questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vo. Thank you, Professor, for appearing before the committee today. You will be provided with a copy of the transcript of today's proceedings for corrections. The committee staff will also email any questions taken on notice from today and any supplementary questions from the committee. So once again, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Committee will now move to the next witness.
Yeah.
Right, okay. I welcome our next witnesses, Dr. Celine Kelso and Dr. Jody Moller. Thank you for appearing before the committee today to give evidence. Please note that the committee staff will be taking photos and videos during the hearing. The photos and videos may be used on the New South Wales Legislative Assembly social media pages. Please inform the committee staff if you object to having photos or videos taken. Can you please confirm that you have both been issued with the committee's terms of reference and information about the standing orders that relate to the examination of witnesses.
Yes, I
Doctor?
can confirm that.
Same here.
Thank you so much. Do you have any questions about this information?
No.
Okay. As part of the formalities, please first state your full name and position, and then take the oath or make an affirmation. I'll start with with you, Dr. Moller.
Yep, so I'm Dr. Jody Moller. I am a chemical toxicologist from the School of Chemistry and Molecular Bioscience at the University of Wollongong. And I, Jody Moller, do hereby affirm and declare that the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Dr.
Hi.
Kelso.
My name is Celine Kelso. I'm an analytical chemist within the same school at Jody, so the School of Chemistry and Molecular Bioscience at the University of Wollongong. And I, Celine, do hereby affirm and declare that the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you so much. It's a good university. It's my university. Thank you so much. Would either or both like to make a short opening statement
I'll start
before
if
we
you wanna add
begin
anything.
questions?
Yep, so I guess just to give you some context on who we are and what we've been doing. So we've been working in e-cigarette research since 2019. And basically we are both chemists. We specifically look at content. So any questions you've got to do with what is in an e-cigarette and what the chemical content is and what the potential harms from that are sort of the sort of questions that we're really well able to answer. So across since 2019, what we've really seen is a shift from sort of free base nicotine over to nicotine salts, which has allowed the concentration of nicotine in e-cigarettes to increase significantly. We've also seen that shift from bottles of e-liquid across to largely now, particularly amongst young people, the use of disposable devices. When we're thinking about e-cigarette content, we really need to think about what the intended content is in an e-cigarette. So someone mentioned before 200 compounds in an e-cigarette. There's actually very, very few compounds actually in an e-cigarette. We do have some additional ones that get formed during the vaporization process, but generally 200 compounds is actually not very many for something that you're inhaling. Tobacco smoke, in contrast, has thousands of chemicals in it. So it's actually a lot easier for us to identify what is actually in there because we can pull all of the pieces apart. So we have the propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, which are the carrier fluids or the solvents that are what forms the cloud. We have nicotine, and then we have a small collection of flavouring liquids in each of the e-cigarettes. That's the intended content, but we then also have some of the unintended content, which is where the potential harm lies. So things like banned substances that shouldn't be in there at all, so contaminants and other things, heavy metals in some cases from degradation of heating coils, and then we also have some of the ingredients reacting with each other to make new compounds, which have potential harm as well. So I guess we sort of need to separate those two really importantly. I guess the only other thing I would really want to say as part of this brief intro is to highlight some of our recent findings for things that we've been doing recently. So we've been focusing really on disposable e-cigarettes over the last year and a half. And what we found is that nicotine is in all of them, regardless of what it says on the packaging, whether it says that it's nicotine-free, whether it doesn't mention nicotine at all. So about 98% of the samples we've analysed recently contained nicotine, regardless of what the packaging said. Young people are primarily using disposable e-cigarettes. They're not using refillable devices. They're only using these disposable devices. Banned or dangerous compounds were found in about 4% of the products that we analysed. Once again, this is specifically in those disposable devices. And just in response to the previous person, I'd just like to add as well, that while we don't know long-term harms, that is absolutely true, we can be very confident because what we do know is what the content is of the e-cigarette compared to what the content is in cigarette smoke. We can be very confident that these are not as harmful as cigarette smoke. We know that things like formaldehyde and acetaldehyde, which are 100% present in e-cigarettes, are at least 20-fold lower in e-cigarettes than they are in cigarette smoke. They're both present. They are carcinogenic, absolutely, but they're present at lower concentrations. Even the metals that we find off the coil, while they're present and they are absolutely dangerous, they're not present at the same concentrations they are in cigarette smoke. So it has to be done, always be a comparison between those different things. E-cigarettes are absolutely not good for you, but they're potentially better for you. They definitely are better for you than smoking. And anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered pretty much everything, so I'll just happy to go to questions.
Okay, thanks, doctors. We'll move to questions, and I might just start off with a couple of questions. In your opinion, and both or either can answer, what actions can the New South Wales government take to support the implementation of the Australian government reforms that are currently being debated in the federal parliament?
At the moment, we've seen that the supply or the access of those devices are mainly from illegal avenues. I guess having a much more available supply via allowed routes like pharmacies, which at the moment is quite difficult to put your hands on, will allow to shift people towards the legal way, which is simply just hard to get at the moment as well.
So you're supporting the banning of importation of these devices, and
So we definitely are supporting the banning of the disposable, not only on the environmental issues that are linked to that, so batteries, disposable resources,
Yeah.
pollutions, but as well in the fact that if you want to curb the access to the young people, which we know the young people are mainly using disposables, preventing the access to those specific devices while allowing other users, ex-smokers, for example, to access vaping products as they would need, would be the pathway we think it's most appropriate.
we understand the federal government is moving towards plain packaging, moving towards limiting the flavours to 2 flavours, restricting it to prescription only. What are your views on those changes proposed changes by the federal government?
So I guess with the flavours in particular, we do have some concerns over the idea that they would be limiting these to only tobacco and mint flavourings.
Yep.
The reasoning behind that is there is no chemical molecule that constitutes tobacco flavour. When I do a chemical analysis, you can't say to me, does this only contain tobacco flavour? Because there is no actual chemical that is tobacco flavour. So when we analyse a tobacco flavoured e-cigarette, every single one of them is different, and most of them contain exactly the same flavouring molecules as what we get in an ice cream flavour or in a strawberry flavour. So they contain a lot of the sweet flavouring molecules, things like ethyl maltol, and they also sometimes contain some of the cooling agents and things that we see in our other e-cigarettes. So because it can't be defined, how do you then enforce what is tobacco flavour and what is not? So our concern there is you can call it tobacco flavour. Does that mean it actually tastes like tobacco? I don't know how that would be, what level that would be enforced. I think potentially putting limits on the maximum concentration of specific flavouring molecules, yes, absolutely, that would work from an enforcement point of view. But I think just blanketly saying only tobacco and only mint, and obviously that's only going to be products that are coming through the legal pathway that are going to be limited to those. That's not going to be touching any of the products that are coming through the black market. So we're still going to be seeing the flavours available there. Additionally, we already have what's called a flavour concentrate. So they're additional strong flavours that people can mix in themselves. So if you're filling up your e-cigarette, you can just add flavour in yourself anyway. So potentially that also isn't going to impede people from going down that pathway. But what you are doing is introducing potential risk, as someone who's adding their own flavour could add too much, have a really high concentration that potentially could be dangerous or cause them harm.
Okay, thank you. Just one more. You're the experts in the analysis of the chemicals that go into vaping cigarettes. What's the most toxic chemical that you are aware of that's going into the vapes?
So in terms of what we know about the chemicals that go in there, we know they're safe to eat. They exist in products that you consume in everyday life, like biscuit, yogurts, lollies, you name it. But we don't have much information as what happened to your respiratory tract when you inhale those compounds after they've been heated up. So we know that some of those flavors will decompose, create some other chemicals, which are formaldehyde, for example, and others, which are born from the degradation of those flavors. But in terms of the flavor itself, we don't know what happened to your lungs when you inhale them at high dosage, as they could be present in the e-cigarette vapor.
Okay,
I was going to
Did you
add,
wanna add?
probably in terms of what we've actually seen recently,
Yeah.
probably the most harmful thing we've seen was ethylene glycol, which is antifreeze. That it was specifically in a set of disposable e-cigarettes that we analysed recently that were confiscated off school-age children from a New South Wales high school. So the teachers confiscated them, they sent them to our labs and we analysed those. And that was the first identification of that compound in an e-cigarette in
And
Australia.
the reason for that compound? The reason for that?
We think it's a contaminant in the production of the propylene glycol, which is the main constituent of the solvent.
Right.
So our concern there is, once again, this is what happens when we push products into a black illicit market, is that we start to see products in there that are not intended.
Okay, thank you. Dr. McDermott?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your submission and for being here today. This is day 2 of the public hearings, and your evidence and some of the things you've said and recommended are quite the opposite of what has been said on day 1 by pretty much all the parties, including parties in their submissions. So you're nodding your head, so you're aware of that. So I'm going to challenge some of the things you've put, because I'd like to hear your views. But before I get to those questions, you made a statement that vapes are better than smoking. And I find that hard to believe when we've heard, like you just said there, some of the chemical products that are actually being mixed into vaping products. The coils, which we believe go back to, will basically dissolve as you're smoking them, and the oils and others. I find it quite incredulous that you could say that. To me, it's just one poison or another poison. It's some of the properties which are seen to be in the vapes, it's a bit like mixing up meth and making that. I mean, I'm very surprised by that. So could you just justify how you could say that when there's not the long-term effects that we're aware of? We have no evidence to show what will happen in 30 years to people who take it. Short-term, well, even that, I mean, I look at regulated tobacco and the purity of it, if I want to use that word, compared to, say, chop, which we see a lot of coming into New South Wales. And then we see millions of vapes in the last few months prior to the regulations of the federal parliament coming in, being imported into this country from China. I can't see how one could be better than the other. Can you make a comment on that?
I'll start first. I think when you want to compare the two, you have to compare, first of all, a same level of exposure. So if you are a one...
Same level of what, sorry?
Exposure.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you are a light smoker and a light vapor, the amount of chemicals that are entering your system in same quantities, so light versus light, would be much lessened if you were vaping than if you are smoking. Now, if it's the same thing if you are a heavy smoker versus a heavy vapor. So you have to compare how much you would do one versus how much you would do the other, and comparing at equivalent levels, then you would have less exposure to toxic chemicals when you would be vaping against when you would be smoking. Now, if you are a light smoker but suddenly vapes 3 bottles of vapes a day, then certainly you will have more chemicals entering your system.
And that's the evidence we've got, is that so far to this hearing, is that if you move from cigarettes to vapes, you vape a great deal more. And the fact that what you're taking in is a lot more nicotine, a lot more other chemicals than a simple cigarette. You may smoke 10 cigarettes a day, but once you start vaping, you're vaping a lot more than just equivalent to 10 cigarettes. So by what you've just said, you're taking a lot more chemicals already if you're doing that.
It will depend on the vapor itself. Like if the person is a heavy vapor, for sure, I'm not contesting the fact that you will uptake more chemicals. But if your aim is to quit smoking by vaping about the same equivalent in controlled doses of nicotine, then you will vape same amount and therefore have in those cases less chemical entering your system. So it's all a comparison of...
Okay, so it's just one for one.
Yes.
And so what we're seeing, the evidence is that people aren't taking it one for one, they're taking it 1 for 20 or one for a lot more. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add, so I guess we know in toxicology, the dose makes the poison. Yeah. So what we know for a fact is that the carcinogenic compounds that are present in tobacco smoke, that is the things that cause the cancer and the other things that we know smoking causes, are present in vapes at lower concentrations, by many fold lower. Not if you vape 20 times more than you would smoke. We're talking like hundreds of fold difference between the levels of these contaminants. So yes, absolutely, I'm not saying vaping is good for you by any stretch of the imagination.
That comment,
but it is a scale.
But you say that, but that hasn't got metal coils in the
No,
in
but
the cigarette.
there's metals in tobacco.
Right, okay.
So arsenic is in tobacco. There's
Yeah.
all these metals that are present in the coils, and let's be honest, the dangerous metals
Yep.
that we're seeing are largely present in the disposable style e-cigarettes, which
Yeah.
we have recommended should not be allowed.
Okay.
So disposables are where we're seeing the dangerous compounds like the ethylene glycol and like the high levels of metals.
So when you say stop importation, you're talking about just disposables, are you?
That's
Because
we
nothing
would
is
like.
produced here, so it's all imported.
Well, the only thing we would like to see definitely banned in Australia is the use of disposable e-cigarettes.
Right. Okay. All right. Good. Well, thank you for those answers. I'll just be quick because I know I've got to go on. But like you were saying in the very beginning, you're making recommendations which are different to everybody else's, and one of them was that you believe regulation of e-cigarettes in line with other tobacco products should be put in place rather than a total ban. Why?
Our concern around that is that what we saw in response to the 2021 changes to the e-cigarette regulation. So in October 2021, we saw the last major regulatory change. And what we saw was the market shift within 2 months to remove the word nicotine from their packaging, to allow them to go through a loophole to sell them over the counter. Our concern is that the market is going to shift quickly again. To find a way to continue selling, and we mentioned in our submission that we've already seen watches that are a vape. We've seen drink bottles that are a vape. We've seen iPhone covers that are a vape. I've even seen a Ventolin puffer, looks exactly like a Ventolin puffer. That one was a cannabis vape, not a nicotine vape, but it's completely indistinguishable. And I believe that the market will shift again. And what we'll see is stealth products coming in, and they will still be coming into Australia. Young people will still be utilising them, and effectively that pushes it deeper into a black market. And I'm concerned that means there are more contaminants and more dangerous compounds getting into these products. We've already seen the introduction of some of these banned substances in the last 18 months. We don't want to see dangerous products in e-cigarettes in Australia at all, whether they're on the black market or elsewhere. So if we have a regulated system, we can have much greater control over what is actually
So
in
you're
the
regulating
e-cigarettes.
the actual e-cigarette as well and the quality of
Correct.
tobacco.
We can get quality control on what is available.
in an
in
attempt to undermine the black market and organised crime.
Exactly that.
Okay, right, thank you. Just one last question. You mentioned the cooling agents, WS23. What is that exactly? Can you explain what it is and what its effect is?
So a coolant agent, as we categorize in there, is a compound that when you inhale, gives your mouth a cold feeling without the taste of mint. So the morning brush for your teeth, and then you inhale, and then that cool feeling that you get in your mouth, it's created by some of those compounds. So they are odorless, tasteless, but have that potential of giving that cooling feeling when you inhale. So those are classified as coolant compounds, and we have found 2 types of those compounds present in e-cigarettes. So those have been used to date in mint toothpaste lollies. They are safe to eat, so they go through your stomach and get digested before they enter your body, but we have no evidence as to how toxic they are when they get through your lungs.
So you're concerned about what will happen. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, well, thank you for answering those questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Member for Cabramatta.
Yeah,
Mr. Voda.
thank you, Dr. Jody Moller and Dr. Celine Kelso for coming to the hearing today. The beauty of this hearing is we have different views, and that's the best, because by hearing all your evidence and expertise, hopefully this Parliament will come to make better legislation on this, because it's quite important. And I hear that you've said like e-cigarettes are not as harmful as tobacco, because we know what is in them, or at least most of the substances maximum is 200 compounds, and flavors do not contain extra compounds or poison or harmful substance. Like the flavors, they don't really. Do you think we should have more than just two flavors?
I guess, like I said earlier, I think the issue really around the two flavours is it's not two flavour molecules. A mint e-cigarette now doesn't just have menthol in it. It has menthol and sweeteners and cooling agents and other things.
It's probably
so even though it's got mint on the label, it isn't just a single flavouring molecule. And like a tobacco has even greater variation. There's no specific set of molecules that are in a tobacco-flavoured product. And my concern is over limiting to tobacco, what you'll end up with is potentially, I don't know, like a sweet tobacco, a cool tobacco, a wild tobacco, who knows what it ends up becoming. And each of those are actually, strawberry with tobacco or something else with tobacco. It's, as long as it's got tobacco on the label, does that get through the regulation? So I think it's really about focusing down on specific chemical components instead of broad names of things. And let's be honest, at the moment, particularly through the illicit market, we see products that don't even have a flavour associated with them. Like there was one called Assault and one called Blitz and one called... So we'd rather see a limitation on making sure that at least the flavour is associated, the flavour name is associated with an actual flavour, than pursuing the tobacco and mint restrictions. And we do know that a lot of ex-smokers do use flavours. The vast majority of them do not vape tobacco and mint flavour. They do actually, their fruit is also the number one flavour option for ex-smokers in addition to young people.
Yeah, like so you're more, you support more regulations because you think e-cigarettes are not as harmful as tobacco, but you support more regulations. So what important actions for the New South Wales government to take to support the implementation of the Australian government's reforms? What are your recommendations or what suggestions do you have?
I think enforcement would be the biggest one. I think at the moment the biggest problem is that we've got a regulation there that says that e-cigarettes that contain nicotine cannot be sold over the counter. But in reality, that is not happening. We're seeing thousands and thousands of e-cigarettes being sold over the counter through tobacconists and other places every single day. And that largely comes down to, and we've done work with the enforcement teams through New South Wales Health. There's just not enough people to do all the enforcement that's required because so many places are selling these products. And then obviously also making sure that there is deterrence for the people that are caught doing the wrong thing. We need to make sure that if someone is selling a product illegally over the counter, that there is actually a significant penalty for that to deter them from continuing to sell that product. In our local area where we are, just in the suburb, like just where I live, there has been 2 American candy stores open in the past 3 months. Both of them sell tobacco products, including vape products over the counter. And we're also recently seeing an increase in nicotine pouches as well. And that's obviously an additional concern because young people can use those incredibly stealthily in the classroom if necessary.
I'm sorry, Tree. The American Candy Store, does it sell candy as well
Yes,
and
yeah.
like things for children?
Yes.
Candy and
Yes.
So it has children's products
Yep.
like lollies and it does vapes as well?
Correct. And they're directly, so that particular one that's opened at Buller is directly across the road from a primary school. And there's been no enforcement to look at that.
Thank you. Telling us that. Sorry, there.
Maybe.
Trey.
No, yeah, I'm done. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Vo. Phil, we've got the member for Orange on WebEx.
Good morning, doctors, and thank you for joining us today. Just a couple of questions. Just in relation to that last point you were talking about, Dr. Moller, in relation to, I suppose, enforcement or lack of proper enforcement. There's, health inspectors and or police are essentially the enforcement agencies that generally, I suppose, investigate a lot of these types of issues or inspect these premises. But you clearly say that there's not enough resources from either of those agencies to appropriately target a number of premises that are popping up all over the place to address this. Is that right? Is that your?
Yeah,
definitely.
I think that's definitely true. I think the other difficult part has been that with the current regulation, and this is changing potentially when the new laws get through federal parliament, but with the current regulation that's been in place, a nicotine-free e-cigarette was legally allowed to be sold over the counter to anyone over 18, but a nicotine-containing e-cigarette required a prescription. And that meant that stores were just removing the word nicotine and selling them over the counter. In order to prove that it contained nicotine, it had to actually go to a chemical lab and get analysed. And that obviously is a lengthy process. It takes time. You can't just walk in there, see an e-cigarette, and realise that needs to be seized. So potentially with an improvement in the federal regulation around these, that will allow that process to become easier, because all e-cigarettes will then fall under the same umbrella, and hopefully that will assist with enforcement.
Yep. Okay. And just finally, essentially, a lot of the issues you said in relation to items that you're searching or examining, seized items or seized vapes or e-cigarettes, the overwhelming majority are disposable types. Is that right?
Yeah, over 90%.
Yep. And I'm not a smoker nor a vapor, but as my understanding, in cigarettes there are filters. Conventional cigarettes have filters in them. You aware of that? Yep. Nodding your head. Yep. That's an agreement. Do you know whether these vapes, do they have filters in them at all?
No.
No, but they don't produce particulate. So, and the aerosol that is produced from an e-cigarette is actually a suspension of tiny droplets of propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin. So there's not particulate matter. It's not smoke. So when you burn a normal cigarette, what you're producing is actually solid particles that are in the form of smoke. So what that's filtering out is some of the tar and some of those solid particles. An e-cigarette doesn't have, it's an aerosol. It's not smoke. So it doesn't require a filter.
Right. But there's no filter in the overwhelming majority of these disposable vapes that you're saying, but to filter any of the, I guess, contents of that vape into your lungs, is there?
No, but it's because it's not particulate, it wouldn't be captured on a filter anyway. It would pass through the filter.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Donato. Well, that concludes the questions, and thank you, doctors, for both appearing before the committee today. You will be provided with a copy of the transcript of today's proceedings for corrections. The committee staff will also email any questions taken on notice from today and any supplementary questions from the committee. So thank you both for your attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, the committee will have a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back. We'll come back at 10:45 p.m. Okay, we might make a start. I welcome our next witness, Dr. Colin Mendelsohn. Thank you for appearing before the committee today to give evidence. Please note that the committee staff will be taking photos and videos during the hearing. The photos and videos may be used on the New South Wales Legislative Assembly social media pages. Please inform the committee staff if you object to having photos or videos taken. Can you please confirm that you have been issued with the committee's terms of reference and information about the standing orders that relate to the examination of witnesses?
I have.
Thank you. Do you have any questions about this information?
No.
Thank you, Doctor. As part of the formalities, please first state your full name and position and then take the oath or make an affirmation.
So I'm Dr. Colin Mendelsohn. I have no current position. I'm a former founding chairman of the Australian Tobacco Harm Reduction Association, a former conjoint associate professor at the University of New South Wales. former member of the committee that develops the Royal Australian and GP smoking cessation guidelines, amongst other things. And just the affirmation?
Yeah.
So I hereby affirm and can declare that the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Doctor. Would you like to make an opening
Yes,
statement
thanks.
before we go to questions?
So Australia's policy on vaping is driven by valid concerns about harm to young people. But we need to balance the small harms to young people against the substantial benefits of vaping in reducing death and disease from smoking. Modelling studies consistently show that vaping has a positive effect on public health overall, and regulation should reflect that. What we currently have with vaping in Australia is prohibition, and drug prohibitions are rarely successful. Vaping is so harshly restricted in Australia that over 90% of users don't comply with the current regulations. This has predictably created a thriving and dangerous black market controlled by criminal gangs with serious escalating violence. The vast majority of products are unregulated, have no quality control, and we've made it easier, not harder, for young people to access these products. And perhaps most importantly, we've reduced legal access by smokers who need these products to quit. History's shown that enforcement and border control efforts have minimal harm on the long-term supply of drugs. I don't think there's any question about that. We know the war on drugs has failed. And the only significant way to reduce a black market is to replace it with a legal and regulated one. The New South Wales Parliament must decide whether to continue the failed regulatory model to continue criminal supply of these products, or to take control and regulate the market. And that, I think, is the key message to this committee. The best way forward is to make vapes available as licensed retail, as adult consumer products from licensed retail outlets with strict age verification like cigarettes and alcohol. This will bring Australia into line with other Western countries. It will reduce youth access. It will enable legal access for the smokers who need it, and it will reduce the black market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to questions from the committee, but Dr. Mendelsohn, I need to bring to your attention that you've been named by a previous person given witness, and they've indicated, the witness said, Dr. Colin Mendelsohn, in his submission, the former chairperson of ATHRA, has suggested that we set aside areas where young people can vape at school. If that's not a tantamount, we have a problem. I don't know what is. How would you like to respond to that comment?
I think we all have to accept that what we're doing at the moment isn't working. I mean, we're constantly told that we have a huge behavioural problem at schools where kids are suffering from nicotine withdrawal and unable to concentrate. What we're doing isn't working. What I'm suggesting is a pragmatic, compassionate approach that recognises that we have a problem. And I'm suggesting a practical solution to that problem. And that is that for young people who are nicotine dependent, who have the permission of their parents, and who have nicotine withdrawals, that they be allowed to vape in an agreed area in schools so that they can get through the day and they don't disrupt the class, and as a compassionate solution for them. I think we'd rather not be in this situation, but we are, and this is about harm reduction. This is about accepting the situation as it is and finding a practical solution. I would rather kids didn't smoke or vape, but I'm being pragmatic. Shouldn't
Those kids be seeking medical advice rather than just freely be allowed to?
This is not about freely allowing. This is about accepting that some kids are addicted and will continue to vape no matter what we do. And we want to minimise the harm to them and the harm to their classroom. We would rather kids didn't vape. In a perfect world, we would rather they didn't vape. But I have to say, vaping is one of the least harmful risk behaviours that kids indulge in. I'd much rather my children or grandchildren vaped than smoked, binge drunk, drink drove, used illicit drugs, were engaged in sexual violence, suicide behaviour. Kids are exposed to much greater risks than vaping. I think we've got this out of perspective, to be honest.
Doctor, many of the submissions the inquiry has received argue that e-cigarettes is a pathway to normal cigarettes.
Yeah.
And vaping is really just another pathway to get people addicted to nicotine, and then after a while they'll just move on to normal cigarettes. What's your views on that?
Look, I think that's been debunked. We heard this same scare story with marijuana, that kids would progress to dangerous drugs. Of course, it didn't happen, and we're not seeing that with vaping. So what's happening with vaping is that vaping overall is diverting young people away from smoking. It's actually a gateway out of smoking. As vaping rates go up in populations, and we see this in most countries, that smoking rates accelerate downwards. So vapes and cigarettes are substitutes. Why would you, if you're a kid who's vaping a mango flavoured vape, which is, a tenth the price of smoking, why would you progress to stinky cigarettes that are much more expensive, that make you cough and are much less enjoyable? And we're not seeing that progression. What we understand is, yes, kids who vape are more likely later to be smokers, but there's no evidence that vaping causes them to take up smoking if they otherwise wouldn't have. So we explain that a much more plausible explanation is that kids who try vaping are just more likely to be risk takers, and we know they're more likely to smoke, to drink, to use drugs. That doesn't mean vaping causes you to drink or to take drugs, nor does it cause you to vape. It's just that these kids have common risk factors, genetic, social, environmental, that make them more likely to smoke anyway. So there's no evidence of causation. And in the real world, we're seeing that as vaping rates go up, smoking rates are falling. I think that's the bottom line. So I think the evidence is very clear now that, yes, some kids may have progressed to smoking who might not have, but far more kids are progressing away from smoking and being diverted from smoking. And there are smokers who are switching to vaping as well, who are switching away from smoking, and that's a good thing.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. McDermott, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I do. As has already been said by the Chair, your evidence is at odds with everybody else's, to be honest.
In Australia, that's true. That's true in Australia.
Okay. Not just in Australia, let's be honest. It's also, but also that other places as well. And we haven't just been looking at Australia in this inquiry. So let's just look at that. We've been told there is a health crisis. That is the same type of health crisis that we had some decades ago, the people smoking cigarettes, which we've then fought, and through government policy and other ways we've changed and lowered the amount of intake of tobacco products. But now we are facing a new generation. You made a comment that the impact of vapes, e-cigarettes, is only small harm to young people. And you said that in your submission as well. That is, once again, opposite everyone else is saying.
Of course.
Now, if we look at this, you've said that nicotine is especially beneficial for young people with ADHD, improving attention and brain function. We've been given evidence the opposite of that, especially from a number of young people who've spoken to us, one in particular, who said that she didn't do it because she was a risk taker. She was quite the opposite. It was the social environment. You've also put to us this morning that we should have a special area for kids who are caught on vaping, which could be argued, I would say, would just increase the amount of people vaping, because now those children now have their own little area to go off and go in, even if they are addicted. So I'm just challenging your things, and I'd like to hear your comments back, because it greatly concerns me that someone with your expertise could say these things when other people have been saying the complete opposite. So if you could, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Look, I think it's important to say that I'm strongly evidence-based. I make a study of the literature, and I'm very aware of what's in the peer-reviewed scientific literature and overseas experience. That's my agenda. My agenda is to save lives and improve public health. To answer some of the questions, is vaping a health crisis? Absolutely not. It's perceived and promoted as a health crisis. What's a health crisis is that 20,000 Australians are dying every year from smoking. That's a health crisis. No one has ever died from vaping nicotine. We've heard about Ivers this morning.
But isn't that just because we don't have the long-term effects
We've
yet?
had 20 years. We've had 20 years. If there was going to be some concern after 20 years, we'd have some clear evidence. In terms of long-term harm, I have to say, I think that's a bit of a furphy. We never insist on long-term proof of harm in any new treatment that we introduce. We introduced COVID vaccines after 3 months. We weren't concerned about, but what about in 30 years' time we might find there's some problem? We thought, no, the risk of delaying this is much greater than the potential risk of introducing it. And that's how we make medical decisions. Yes. And to say that we don't have long-term harm, therefore we shouldn't use it, ignores the fact that 20,000 people are dying every year in Australia, 8 million globally every year. And we've got to consider that in our long-term assessment. Just on the point that you made earlier about are e-cigarettes actually safer than smoking, there is no question that e-cigarettes are dramatically safer than smoking. From the scientific research, we know that there's over 7,000 chemicals in smoke, mostly in high doses. There's generally less than 200 chemicals in vapour. They're mostly less than 5%. Almost all are less than 1% of what they are in smoke. We know that the poisons in vapours after they've switched from smoking drop dramatically. We know that when they switch from smoking, their asthma improves, their COPD improves, their blood pressure improves, their lung function improves, they have fewer respiratory functions. There are a whole range of health benefits.
But isn't that, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just trying to explore this. I'm not having a go at you exploring this. But if I put to you this, is that you're talking about people taking e-cigarettes that are perhaps regulated, perhaps we know what the product is. The millions of vapes that are coming in from China at the moment, record highs up until this month. We don't know what's in them. We talk all kinds of chemicals. It's like trying to say, well, and I'll equate it to other drugs. There's certain levels of chemicals, etc., methamphetamine, compared to a well-mixed bout of cocaine. I mean, it's, you know what I mean? I'm looking at the product
I know what you
itself.
mean. And I think Dr. Moller answered that question. There's very small differences. She pointed out, yes, there are cooling agents. 3 or 4% had banned substances, chemicals in them. There were higher levels of metals. But there's not a lot of difference. The fact is that they're vastly safer than cigarette smoking. And of course, what I'm here to say is that we need to stop this black market. We're not going to stop it by enforcement and policing. We're only going to stop it by changing to a legal regulated model. I'm very against the black market. It's doing a lot of harm, but we can't just stop it by the methods that are being suggested.
Can I just explore the black market just briefly? I know you're not from law enforcement,
no,
but I'll just ask, so who runs the black market into this country? It's mostly from China, is that correct?
No, it's mostly controlled by criminal networks. Mostly Middle Eastern gangs, supported by outlaw motorcycle groups. They employ young people as dealers. They have young people who perform some of their crimes, carjacking and the actual fire bombings for them. So it's mostly
organised crime.
Organised crime.
I'm talking about e-cigarettes.
No, that's run by organised crime. And the Health Minister said that the profits from organised crime are being used for sex trafficking, drug trafficking and other illegal offences.
Yeah, I understand that, but what I'm asking you is that we know that the e-cigarettes predominantly that are coming into this country are imported, disposables, etc., particularly, are coming from China.
Yes.
Millions of the products
that's right.
a month, okay?
Yep.
So, but that isn't coming into organised crime, is it? It's coming into...
It's being imported by organised crime groups.
Yes. As well as shops and
mostly
other
the shops,
organisations.
Mostly the shops buy them through organised crime groups. Some do import directly, but the vast majority are imported by organised crime groups who have a network of distributors who visit shops and try and arrange for them to sell their products.
And you have evidence of that?
Oh, that's well known. Well,
no, I've worked organised crime for many years, so it's not so well known.
Yeah.
And we're putting things in evidence here in this hearing, so I put this question to you again. Do you have evidence, have you seen evidence of this network you're talking about for e-cigarettes?
I understand. What I understand, I'm speaking to a criminologist from Melbourne, Dr. James Martin, who assures me that the organised crime groups who import tobacco products have now pivoted to e-cigarettes, and so they are using importing these products through their networks, and I've read that from other sources as well.
Okay. Well, thank you, Doctor.
But to answer some of the other questions,
Yeah, please.
Are vapes a small harm for young people? Yes, they are. The main concern is nicotine dependence, and from our two largest national surveys recently, the ASAD and the National Drug Strategy Household Survey, about 3 to 5% of 14 to 17-year-olds have said they may be addicted to these products. That's in their words from the drug strategy. So that's the main concern. Nicotine dependence is a concern, but it's not a serious medical issue. Vapes are not as addictive as smokes. If kids stop vaping, they'll get over that in a couple of weeks. It'll do them no harm. Other serious effects, there's very little evidence of that. There's no evidence that vaping causes serious, functionally important respiratory problems. There's no evidence it triggers asthma. It doesn't cause seizures, normal vaping, in spite of what we keep hearing. It doesn't cause spontaneous pneumothorax. It doesn't cause serious lung disease. There are no serious harms that I'm aware of in the medical literature in young people. Yes, they may get short-term cough, wheeze, and that's not good. It's transient. So I think there's a lot of moral panic about the harm to young people, but the facts from the scientific literature do not support that being a serious concern. And I have to say that of all the people who vape in Australia, teenagers are less than 5% of the total. And I think we need to look at the balance of that in determining our policy to vaping. Are we going to make a policy that's causing a small amount of harm to a small number of people? And to what extent do we need to consider the needs of the 95% of people who vape, who are at immediate and substantial risk from smoking, which otherwise many of them would be doing?
Thank you, Doctor. We'll now move to the member for Orange, Dr. Mr. Phil Donato. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Doctor. I just want to ask you some questions in relation to some of the evidence that you've given thus far. Mm-hmm. You said in your opening address that vaping was so harshly regulated in this state. But we've heard evidence that, in fact, you can buy vapes in basically any sort of convenience store. You can buy it from tobacco shops, service stations, lolly shops, online. You can buy it through social media platforms. It's hardly a regulated industry. You'd have to agree.
That's exactly not the opposite to that. So what you're talking about is black market illegal products are available everywhere, and that's the problem. And that's what I'm arguing we need to do something about. The legal regulated market is less than 10% of the total. And it's because we're so strictly regulating it that people aren't using the legal market. We heard from Professor Ivers this morning that GPs would just step up and supply these products. It's not going to happen. I've taught thousands of GPs about smoking, and I can tell you that, and there have been a couple of studies recently that have questioned GPs. There have been peer-reviewed studies questioning Australian GPs about vaping. They found that the GPs are not informed about vaping. They say that we don't know about it. We don't know how to write scripts. We're sceptical about it. We're not even sure why they're asking us to do this. We have medico-legal concerns. You're asking us to prescribe a drug that's not approved. GPs are very reluctant to take this issue up, and I've spoken to a lot of GPs about that. Pharmacists are very unwilling to dispense vapes, and very few have a significant stock. And patients say, why should I go to the doctor and the pharmacist, spend my time, all that inconvenience, and have to go to the pharmacy to buy products that I don't like, that have are restricted in flavour and nicotine? I can tell you that the pharmacy model is not going to work.
Right. Doctor, you've also, the terms of reference for this committee are broadly around, I suppose, the effects that this has on young people, its availability and prevalence amongst young people. who most of those young people aren't going to the doctors and getting prescriptions for e-cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
They're purchasing from, like I said, from disposable, either on social media. We've heard evidence that you can purchase it on TikTok and Snapchat and those platforms, or other stores. And we've also heard evidence that, and I want to challenge you or ask you some questions in relation to what you said about the harmful impacts, or there's been no serious health consequences. I'm paraphrasing you here. Result of people vaping, but you would agree with me. There's been young people being hospitalised. We've heard that in this inquiry that people have been taken to hospital. You'd agree with that?
What does that mean, though? That means they've gone to the
people taken to hospital, young people taken to hospital.
Well, I'd like to see the evidence for that. I think a lot of what's happens is that kids to use these high nicotine products that are available through the black market, they get nauseous, they get dizzy from too much nicotine. They're not smokers. They pass out, they're taken to the hospital. I've not seen any evidence of any serious harm.
Okay. So we've heard that these a lot of these illegal vapes are highly comprised of extremely high levels of nicotine. You would agree with that?
Yes.
Yes. And nicotine is a highly addictive drug. You'd agree with that?
Depending on the way it's given. Depends on the way it's given.
Okay.
So if you give it in a patch, it's not.
Okay. And this inquiry's also heard, high levels of nicotine we're talking about.
Yep.
Certainly what's been consistent across this inquiry is that these vapes comprise high levels of nicotine, not much higher than what you would ordinarily get in cigarettes that you would purchase, commercial cigarettes. You agree with that?
Look, I think the black market products are very high in nicotine, and that's one of the problems with this black market. They provide unnecessarily high concentrations of nicotine, and that's why we need to eliminate the black market.
Yeah, and that can cause, and we've heard evidence that anxiety, depression, impacts to respiratory, lungs, teeth, gums, all those types of things are some of the side effects from these vapes.
I think there's very good evidence now that vaping. I think there's very good evidence that nicotine relieves anxiety, it relieves depression, it improves cognition, memory, alertness, it's pleasurable, and it helps a whole range of medical conditions. If people are addicted to nicotine and they stop it, they will get withdrawal, and that lasts 10 to 14 days. And yes, during those times, people will have some anxiety as a result. Right.
So what you just said there was that, in essence, is that you're disputing then, are you, that these harmful impacts that others have told this inquiry, these either e-cigarettes or vapes cause, especially the illegal ones that you purchase in these premises or locations, you're saying they actually can be quite beneficial. Is that your evidence?
What I'm saying is that there are positive benefits from nicotine. And that's one of the reasons people smoke. They smoke to relax, they smoke to help them concentrate, they smoke because they enjoy it. I'm saying that some of the kids who use these products will experience some of those positive benefits. I'm also saying that I don't think kids should smoke or vape, but that's why they're choosing to use these products.
But surely the harmful impacts that these vapes are having would outweigh those positive impacts that you say. Wouldn't you agree?
I would strongly disagree with that. I would strongly disagree with that. I would strongly disagree with that. So I wrote an article recently that argues that the overall impact to young people for their public health is beneficial from vaping. Now, I'm not encouraging kids to smoke or vape, but when you look at the evidence, the fact that smoking rates amongst kids are falling faster than ever as vaping rates go up, to me that far outweighs any harm, and I think the harms are fairly small. I think most vaping by young people is experimental and short-term. It's a pattern which isn't associated with any serious harms. And the benefit of not smoking is deadly. Smoking kills 2 out of 3 long-term people. We only have to stop a small number of people smoking to see a substantial benefit. As I said, I've yet to see any serious harms in young people from vaping.
But you'll agree with me, we haven't had a lot of time in relation to vaping. It's only been a fairly recent thing that young people have been taking up over in the last couple of years. It hasn't had years and years of research or data or analysis to be relied upon, like cigarettes, has it?
Well, I think you'll agree that any new drug that we release on the market doesn't have long-term data. And I think in the case of vaping, we have to compare the potential risks, and there may well be problems we find in the future, but we've got to compare that against the known harms of smoking. We know that 2 out of 3 smokers will die if they continue to smoke, and I think there's some urgency to get vaping out there. Vaping is by far the most popular quitting aid in Australia. In spite of what was said earlier at this hearing, it's by far the most effective quitting aid. It is more effective without doctor's support than any other treatment. And that's why in Australia and in other countries, we're seeing an effect from vaping in smoking rates. There was a study done in Australia, published in Addiction about 3 years ago, which found that as vaping rates were going up, the smoking rates and quitting rates were significantly higher. There was an important study done a couple of years ago, a modelling study that looked at the Australian population and modelled the effect of introducing vaping, allowing for the harms from vaping, the benefits from vaping, the harms to children. They found hundreds of thousands of lives would be saved and quality of life years preserved if vaping had been allowed to be regulated like it is, for example, in the US. But I think we can do a lot better than that.
Yes. No further questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Doctor.
Can I just add a supplementary to that?
Yeah, sure.
So, isn't that just giving up one addiction to go to another?
No, look, it's not. What it's giving up is a deadly addiction that kills 2 out of 3 users. That takes 10 years of life on average from people. It kills 8 million people in the world every year. And replacing it with a harm reduction alternative, so that's a much safer alternative that won't kill people, that gives them a tiny fraction of the chemicals, but keeps them off the deadly option. And to me, that's harm reduction. It's replacing a deadly option with a much safer alternative. No, we're not stopping nicotine, but we're stopping people from dying.
Okay.
And this is for people who can't otherwise quit.
Oh.
So it's just harm reduction.
Mr. Vo?
Thank you, Dr. Colin Mendelsohn, for coming here today and being part of the hearing. And thank you for all the information. And I realise you've been in the industry of tobacco harm reduction for over 40 years. And although we may not always agree, but I thank you for coming to give a different view on this. And thank you for being such a respectful, calm witness. My question is, your submission states that nicotine is especially beneficial for young people with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, improving attention and brain function. That's on page 10. This appears to be at odds with evidence cited by many other stakeholders who claim nicotine is harmful to a developing brain. Why is your position different?
Look, I think it's well accepted now that people with ADHD are much more likely to smoke. And the reason is that nicotine's a stimulant, and stimulants are the treatment for ADHD. And I have had many patients who've told me that once they found smoking, their ADHD improved. They can't stop because when they go back onto it, they get the ADHD again. If vaping was harmful to the adolescent brain, we would expect to see millions of adults now who smoked as young people with brain damage. We don't see, there's no epidemiological evidence for that. In people who have smoked, they've followed them up and looked at them as adults. They smoked as youth, and as adults, there's been no difference in IQ, no difference in educational achievement, no difference in cognitive function in different studies compared to people who didn't smoke as young people. Now, if smoking has no effect, how can vaping have an effect? So the evidence for vaping harming the adolescent brain is based on large doses of chronic use of nicotine in animal studies. Now, the general consensus is that cannot be extrapolated to humans. There is no evidence in humans, and like most animal studies, that's perhaps a signal, but there's no evidence that can be extrapolated to humans. So I think it's purely speculative. The evidence doesn't support it.
And just a follow-up question. So what do you think needs to happen for the prescription model to work effectively?
The prescription model won't work effectively. So the prescription model has not been rejected by the doctors, rejected by the pharmacists, rejected by the patients, the users. The only way to regulate these products, I believe, is to replace the black market with a tightly regulated adult consumer product where people can buy from licensed retail outlets like cigarettes. So, and if you have a license to sell these products and you sell to a child, you lose your license or you have a huge fine. And this is the way they do it in other Western countries. In New Zealand, they do not have a significant black market. Why would you? You could walk into a dairy, as they call them, or a vape shop, and get a legal, regulated product quite easily. You don't have to find the local dealer to provide these products for you. So there's no need for a black market, and these products are regulated. They're approved for safety and quality, and they're kept away from kids. There'll always be some kids who'll get them, but that's inevitable. But if the kids are mostly getting products through the black market now, I think most of that will cease over time.
Thank you, Doctor. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Vo. And thank you, Doctor, for appearing before the committee today. You will be provided with a copy of the transcript of today's proceedings for corrections, and the committee staff will also email any questions taken on notice from today and any supplementary questions from the committee. Thank you for your attendance. Members, the next witness is online, so when we're ready, we'll start. Okay. I welcome our next witness, Professor Nicole Lee, appearing via WebEx. Thank you for appearing before the committee today to give evidence. Please note that the committee staff will be taking photos and videos during the hearing. The photos and videos may be used for social media purposes on the New South Wales Legislative Assembly's social media pages. Please inform the committee staff if you object to having photos or videos taken. Can you please confirm that you've been issued with the committee's terms of references and terms of reference and information about the standing orders that relate to the examination of witnesses?
Yes,
have you received those? Okay. Do you have any questions about this information?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. So as part of the formalities, can you please state your full name and position and take the oath or make an affirmation?
Thanks. I will be making the affirmation. My name is Professor Nicole Lee. I am the CEO in this capacity, the CEO of 360 Edge, which is a specialist consultancy in the alcohol and drug sector. But I also hold positions as adjunct professor at the National Drug Research Institute at Curtin University, and also as CEO of Hello Sunday Morning, which is an alcohol-focused treatment provider.
Thank you, Professor. Would you like to do the affirmation, please?
Yeah, so I, Nicole Lee, do hereby affirm and declare that the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Professor. Would you like to make a short opening statement before we begin questions?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Well, thank you first for the opportunity to appear today. As you know, tobacco is the leading cause of death and disease in Australia. So that's the leading cause. But the risk from tobacco is not from nicotine. What makes cigarettes so dangerous is the naturally occurring chemicals in tobacco leaves and the chemicals that cigarette companies add to it for various reasons. So that's why e-cigarettes and vaping is significantly less harmful than tobacco cigarettes, because they don't contain all of those dangerous chemicals from tobacco. Research estimates that vaping has less than 5% of the harm of smoking and less than 1% of the cancer risk. There's also very good evidence that e-cigarettes help people quit or reduce smoking, And countries that have increased the availability of e-cigarettes have shown significant declines in smoking. Even in Australia, the latest data shows us that there's a large reduction in smoking, the largest we've seen in decades, in fact, as vaping has increased in the last few years. So overall, e-cigarettes pose a relatively small risk for a very large public health gain in reduction in smoking. And most people who use vapes would buy them legally if they could, but the current models of availability, particularly the prescription-only model, has restricted access so much that 90% of adults who use vaping products buy them illegally. The limited legal access to vapes has created a black market. And on the black market, products are unregulated, they're not tested for safety or quality, and they can easily be accessed by teens. Reducing access and increasing enforcement in the face of something that is of high demand is not effective, is not an effective approach to reducing the black market. And we have already learnt this lesson from illicit drugs, and many governments are starting to regulate these drugs properly through decriminalisation, diversion and legalisation for personal use. So on the one hand, non-prescription vaping products are being criminalised, and then on the other, more harmful tobacco cigarettes carry no penalty. So we risk actually people going back to cigarette smoking, and that means we might see increases in cancer and other harms as a result in the future. We definitely don't want teens recreational vaping, but the best way to reduce access by teens is to increase access for adult smokers so they don't have to go to the black market. And just finally, vaping in principle should be treated as a health issue, not a criminal justice issue. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor. We'll now move to questions, and if I can ask you the first question. In your submission, it states that punitive approaches to vaping in schools are not beneficial in achieving behavioural changes. So how do we discourage the uptake of vaping and support young people with nicotine dependencies?
Yeah, so if kids have nicotine dependence already, the best option for them is treatment and support. In terms of prevention, we know that scare tactics and punitive measures don't work for anything. They don't work for alcohol, illicit drugs, or for vaping. The best option is to provide good and early education and clear guidelines in schools in terms of the use of e-cigarettes and the consequences for that. We know that things like suspending or excluding children from school when they've used alcohol, illicit drugs, or e-cigarettes or anything else actually increases their risk rather than reduces it. So overall, taking a more education approach, we know that when you give kids good information, legitimate information that's factual, they tend to make much better decisions about drugs generally.
Do you support schools that confiscate vapes
Yes.
without the punitive action
Yes.
taken?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the reasonable measures that schools can take is, having policies that vaping is not okay on school premises, and like many other things, they may confiscate them if they find them, without the punishment element to it.
Okay. And what can schools do to support students that they know are nicotine dependent? They've identified students. Just confiscating the vapes by itself is not going to help that student,
No.
even if there's repetitive confiscation. So what's your view on what role the schools can play in helping that student?
Yeah, I just reiterate your point that if someone is already nicotine dependent, just confiscating the equipment is not going to do anything. I think the one thing to remember is that by far the majority of teens who try vapes only use them once or twice. and then they don't use them again. Even those that use regularly don't use for very long, and they don't use very frequently. There's a very small percentage who would be considered dependent, so dependent that they couldn't quit on their own. We need to be sure that those teens that are using vapes are not existing smokers or pre-smokers, because even though they are teens, it's still safer for them to be, if they're smokers, it's still safer for them to be vaping than smoking. But if they're just recreational vapers, we have good brief interventions and good treatment options for that are also apply to cigarette smoking, similar to cigarette smoking, that can be applied. And I think treatment generally for adults and for teens is the best way to reduce demand.
What about, we've heard prior evidence that peer pressure plays a large role in terms of young people taking up vaping. We've heard that friends pressure particular students into trying the vape, and then they get addicted, with the nicotine and so forth. So what's your advice for schools, if you can give that advice, on to how to deal with the peer pressure aspect?
Yeah, I think this is why education right across the school is important, and very early in an age-appropriate way, because teens do kind of things spread, fads spread through teens, all sorts of fads, so the education is really important. Early education is really important, and age-appropriate education is really important. I think just remembering again that we shouldn't panic if kids have tried vapes a couple of times, because by far the majority of them have never used one, and even those who try them don't use them very frequently. So I think some universal education across the school, and then some targeted intervention if a teen has, we know that they've used vapes.
Thank you, Doctor. I'll move to Dr. McDermott.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Doctor, for being for us today. As I've already said to people who presented prior to yourself, this second day of hearing, we're hearing evidence which is quite at odds at times with what the hearing said the other day. I'm sure you're aware of that. One of the things, and it's been touched on by the Chair, that you talk about in your submission, is that punitive approaches to vaping in schools are not beneficial in achieving behavioural change. Now, we've had evidence, and one in particular from a 16-year-old who became addicted to vapes at 11. I put that to her. She said the opposite. She said that amongst her peers, having a punitive approach, having a week suspension, actually helps them to stop and refocus. So it's the opposite of what you've said. So I'm just wondering, with your statement on page 3, what evidence have you used? Where have you got that from?
So we have a lot of research. So one thing to say is that individuals may have different experiences, but we need to take a kind of more bird's eye view and look at the impact overall of different measures. And we have a lot of research on alcohol and other drugs, pharmaceuticals and illicit drugs, that is all quite consistent, that shows that punitive measures, fear tactics, scare tactics, those kinds of approaches are not effective. Good factual information and education that's age appropriate is the most effective way to address all sorts of drug use, alcohol, pharmaceutical, tobacco, and vaping across the board. There will always be some people that don't respond to that, but overall that is the best approach to catch as many people in the education net as we can.
So those children which are addicted at that age, I don't disagree with what you've put, and it's just I've put to you the opposite view, but what is the avenue then? They're caught vaping, you take the product off them, you then send them to medical practitioners to start counselling, or what process would you follow?
I think that's all very individual, but one of the first things would be an assessment from a health professional. That would be a reasonable next step. Look, I think that parents play an important role, and they are at the moment very confused about the communication that they should be making to their teens as well. So not just education for the teens, but also for the teachers and for the parents is really important. If someone is dependent and wants to quit, then an assessment from a health professional is a good first step.
Okay.
A GP, for example, or a drug and alcohol professional, or a quit facilitator.
Okay. You say in your submission, it states that on page 5, that strengthening restrictions on the availability of e-cigarette products is unlikely to improve the current situation. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so look, we know from decades and decades of attempting to manage a whole range of other drugs, that if there's a substance that people want, restricting it, criminalising it, making it hard to get, doesn't stop them using it. All that happens is that they go to the black market, and a huge black market develops. And that means the problem for me with the black market is that that it actually makes it much easier for teens to access than if they were legally available for adults.
When we've put the teens in evidence here, they've said that they really thought smoking was disgusting. They thought cigarettes and butts and that stuff was filthy. However, they really liked vapes. So in a way, with having access to the black market or other ways, giving them access or them using vapes, they wouldn't be using anything. They wouldn't be smoking at all, I'd put to you, if it wasn't for vapes. They wouldn't be taking they wouldn't be like, I don't know what you like at school, but what we saw when I was in school was that we'd sit in the toilets like these kids do with vapes, so we'd do the same with cigarettes. There'd be none of that. And so my concern is that no matter what we do, if those vapes are available and we've restricted it, when I was a teenager, when I was underage, we could still get cigarettes easily enough. It would be the same with the vapes. So it's not going to stop the black market. It's not going to stop unscrupulous retailers still selling the cigarettes or having older people buy it for them. It just means that they'll be taking vapes instead of the cigarettes. So I put that to you.
Well, that's one possible logical outcome, but we don't know that would be the case. We have a really, really good legislative framework for cigarettes, for tobacco cigarettes, that could be applied to vaping products, and that legislative framework has significantly reduced adult smoking and access by teens. And so the problem with that argument, which is very logical, Senator, is that what happens with the black market is that it's actually easier for teens to access. And as soon as we start to control and regulate the market, give access to adults, then no adults are going to be buying on the black market and the bottom falls out of it. And so there's not that much around for teens to access. There will, as you alluded to, when I was at school as well, we weren't meant to be smoking, but there were many people who did try cigarettes. And there will always be some people who will find a way. But what we're trying to do is, take a more public health view, and regulating properly is the best way to reduce access for the bulk of teens who are just trying it because it's there.
So you'd regulate it like they would with cigarettes. Does that mean plain packaging as well?
All of that.
All
We know
that, banning
all of-
ads, all those
Yeah.
things, taking it. Okay, great.
Absolutely.
Good.
We know
All
that
right.
all of those things are effective that we've applied to cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other option is to make, that might be more kind of palatable to some people, is to make therapeutic access much easier. So at the moment, you have to go to your GP, you have to, which is expensive. GPs are, over, kind of under pressure and overworked, and it's really hard to get in to see your GP. It's just much easier and cheaper to go buy it on the black market. So if that process was also made more available to adults, also the black market would be significantly reduced as well.
Okay. Do you think there'll be a reluctance by GPs to prescribe a medical nicotine like this way?
Currently, there is significant reluctance among GPs, we know, to prescribe. They're getting a lot of conflicting information about the safety of e-cigarettes and about who should be prescribed them, and so they're very reluctant. Many of them are very reluctant to prescribe. But if we are going to go down that prescription route, it needs to be much easier to access.
Would it make sense to expand nicotine supply this way to pharmacists as well? Like you've seen it with, say, the flu injection and things like that. Now pharmacists take those things on. Or does there need to be a doctor involved rather than just I know they're both doctors, but rather than just a pharmacist? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, my personal view is that a pharmacy option is worth looking at. I remember when we first had nicotine replacement therapy, so gum and patches and all of that kind of stuff. We went through the same process. It was a very long time ago now, maybe 30, 40 years ago, I'm not sure. But initially you had to go to your doctor to get it, and then we realised that that wasn't working very well, and so it shifted into the pharmacy realm where there was some supervision by a medical health professional, but it was much easier to access.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Doctor.
Thanks, Dr. McDermott.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Professor Nicole Lee, for coming and giving evidence today. Thank you for providing us another view. It's good for us to hear you and probably make better and more accurate legislation. My question to you is, your submission states that the overall public health benefits of e-cigarettes are likely to be considerably greater than potential harm. That's on page 3. Why do you believe this to be the case?
Primarily because the main harm from vaping and from e-cigarettes is dependence on nicotine, assuming that there's a regulated supply. So at the moment, when you buy on the black market, you don't know what's in it, and there could be all sorts of contaminants and things. But if we were to regulate properly and manufacture it properly, and people just got the nicotine without all of the other crap in there that is in the unregulated market, then we know that there's not the chemicals, the dangerous chemicals that are present in cigarettes. And the main risk is dependence on nicotine. Now, dependence on nicotine is a pretty benign thing. 95% of cigarette smokers are dependent on nicotine, and it's not in the same way. It doesn't have the same harms as some other drugs, like say methamphetamine, that has, if someone's dependent on it, there's a whole load of other social, mental health, and physical health kind of harms associated with that. With vaping and nicotine e-cigarettes, it's really the main issue is the nicotine itself. So we don't get the risk of cancer, we don't get the risk of heart problems, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, and what needs to happen for the prescription model to work more effectively, you think?
Yeah, the number one thing is to ensure much easier access for adult smokers. So any way we can improve access to adult smokers, they will absolutely they would absolutely buy legally if they could. And then that means that they're not buying in the black market, they're not supporting illegal production, and that will significantly reduce, and also significantly reduce access for kids. So the number one thing is to improve access to e-cigarettes and vaping for adult smokers at least.
Thank you, Doctor. No further questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vo. We have the member for Orange on WebEx. Do you have any questions there, Phil?
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Professor, for your evidence. I just want to ask you a few questions in relation to some of the things you've said today.
Yeah.
You said earlier in your evidence that e-cigarette use is generally, especially amongst young people, experimental and transient. That was in reference, I suppose, to young people.
Yes.
Do you have a view? Is part of your idea in relation to reform or legislation around e-cigarette or vaping that it should only be for adults? It shouldn't be children or people under the age of 18 shouldn't be able to access it. Is that your view?
In general, yes, that would be my view. The only exception is for teens who are already smoking and who are already dependent on smoking. Switching to vaping for them would be much safer.
You said that, and your evidence was that kids that would generally try vaping may only use it, would only use it frequently or not very often. Might be something they might try with their friends, with their peers a few times, but then not partake in it to any degree of permanency. Was that what you meant by that?
Yes, that's correct. So we already know, like if you put all the data together from different sources, somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of young people have never ever had a vape, tried it once. So that's like the first thing to keep in mind. And then about 20% of young people have used at least once in the last 12 months, but the majority of those have used just a handful of times. Most of them try it once or twice and then don't bother with it again, because I don't know if you've used a vape, but it's not that good. It's pretty disgusting, and it is a bit like smoking. And then there's a small percentage of people, about 5 to 7%, who are regular users who are at high risk of becoming dependent on it.
Yeah. Of course, we've heard evidence during the course of this inquiry about the level of how addictive nicotine is, and obviously that's the risk that young people who choose to vape or get led down the path of vaping with their friends or peers may in fact become dependent on it because of the nicotine issue. And obviously that has health implications as well. You're agreeing, I'm assuming you agree with that? The purpose of the Hansard transcript?
Yeah, so the biggest risk for people who vape is nicotine dependence. But as I said, nicotine dependence in itself is a fairly benign dependence when you consider all the other possible effects of drugs.
Well, I don't know about completely benign.
Not complete. I don't mean completely benign, but relatively benign. The biggest risk from tobacco smoking is not the nicotine itself. The nicotine just keeps people coming back for more, then all of the dangerous chemicals in it, they're just getting more and more of those dangerous chemicals, and that's not the case with nicotine vapes.
But there's dangerous chemicals that have been found in nicotine vapes as well. Do you agree?
Yes, and now this is the kind of the tricky thing is that currently nicotine vapes are illegal, they're unregulated, and therefore nobody knows what's in them, and all sorts of contaminants can be put into them without any controls. But what I'm suggesting is that we move to a much more regulated market, in which case people will know exactly what's in it. We can restrict any dangerous chemicals in it, and then the biggest risk is then just the nicotine dependence. And for people who are already smoking, they're already dependent on nicotine.
Okay, nothing further, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor, for appearing before the committee today. You will be provided with a copy of the transcript of today's proceedings for corrections. The committee staff will also email any questions taken on notice from today and any supplementary questions from the committee. Thank you for your attendance.
Thanks so much for your time.
Okay, we'll now organise the next witness. Associate Professor Raglan Maddox. Thank you for appearing before the committee today to give evidence. Please note that the committee staff will be taking photos and videos during the hearing. The photos and videos may be used on the New South Wales Legislative Assembly social media pages. Please inform the committee staff if you object to having photos and videos taken. Can you please confirm that you've been issued with the committee's terms of reference and information about the standing orders that relate to the examination of witnesses?
I confirm that I've received those documents.
Thank you so much. Do you have any questions about this information?
No further questions.
As part of the formalities, can you please state your full name and position and then take the oath or make an affirmation?
I can. Good morning, everyone. Raglan Maddox. I come from the Bugamani model clan in Papua New Guinea and have the pleasure of leading the tobacco-free program at the National Centre for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Wellbeing Research. I'll go into the affirmation.
Yes, please.
I, Raglan Maddox, do hereby affirm and declare that the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Professor. Would you like to make a short opening statement before we begin questions?
Yes.
Okay, please.
Thank you. I'll also begin just by confirming that I don't receive any vested interest money. I don't receive any money from the tobacco industry or the vaping industry. Consistent with Article 5.3 of the World Health Organisation Framework Convention of Tobacco Control. I also wanted to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the elders past and present, but also acknowledge the youth and young people because they're going to be the leaders taking our cultures, values, beliefs forward into the future. And I wanted to acknowledge and respect those young people that have come to this committee and shared their truths and their stories. In that note, I also wanted to acknowledge that health is not actually just the absence of disease. Health is much broader than that. We're talking about social, physical, mental, spiritual health and well-being, not just of the individual, but the community, the health of the environment. And so I think it's really important that when we're looking at things like our youth and our young people, the future generations to come, that we leave Australia and New South Wales in a place that fosters the health and well-being of our people. And I wanted to acknowledge that this is a harm-generating product. We have talked about that. You've heard about that over the last period. We've heard about that this morning. We've heard about the evidence around short-term harms. If we know there's short-term harms, we can be guaranteed that there's going to be long-term harms. Evidence suggests that inhaling aerosol of any kind is general rule of thumb, it's not great for us. It's not great for our health and well-being. And I think communities have been saying that for a while now. And so I wanted to acknowledge the work of this committee in taking this step. As you know, and as written in my document, my submission, there is disproportionately high rates of tobacco use among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for a whole range of complex reasons, including being paid in rations of tobacco as part of the colonial process. But we do know that 70% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people want to quit smoking, 75% wish they never took it up. This speaks to the environment in which we live, where it's been socialised and available on every street corner. But the majority of people quit cold turkey, and the majority of people want to quit. So with the right supports, with the right infrastructure around communities, we know that people will be smoke and nicotine free. So I just wanted to acknowledge and celebrate that work in reducing tobacco use, but also look forward to the outcomes from this committee in supporting youth and young people from not taking up e-cigarettes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those opening remarks. We'll now move to questions. If I can ask the first question. You just stated that the vast majority of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who smoke want to quit, and you've indicated a figure of 70%,
Yep.
and 75% indicated that they wish they've never started. What, in your opinion, as a government, can we do to support those wishes of our Indigenous people in relation to smoking cessation?
I think there's a range of things. I think many years ago I started in this sort of in tobacco control about 2007, and I remember communities saying, stop selling it to us. I go to the Aboriginal Medical Service, I go to the GP, I call the quit line, but I know that I can buy this product 24/7, 7 days a week at numerous stores. So if I'm trying to give this up, and it's a highly addictive product, as we've heard, why is it available at every street corner? We've known for over 70 years about the harms of tobacco, but it's still available as a everyday consumer product, which normalises that behaviour. It normalises that, and we as a society tend to minimise the role of addiction, the challenges with addiction. We know how hard it is. And so as a result, those 20-odd thousand Australians that die every year, I think just under 7,000 in New South Wales, it becomes part of our everyday reality that we know people that will have tobacco-related illness and also tobacco-related deaths. So we know that 37% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people pass away due to tobacco use, 50% over age of 45. And so in terms of passing on traditions, cultures, languages, the work across New South Wales, the work of land councils across here in celebrating and acknowledging the oldest living culture around the world is exceptional, but we have an opportunity to reduce retail outlet availability, as well as those personal choices, supporting things like the quit line, GPs to provide cessation supports and other things. But we know communities want to quit, and we just need to get around and support them to be nicotine free.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. McDermott?
Thank you. You talked about availability then, and it reminded me of how in certain states they've banned alcohol altogether in certain communities. Is that what you're talking about, doing things like that?
Yes and no. I think licensing is key. I think where communities have gone dry and it's a community-driven approach, I think it works. The top-down approach doesn't necessarily work and has other implications. But we know at the moment, and I guess the privilege and honour I get to listen to community stories is they can't get their meds, they can't get bread, milk and those things 24/7, but they can buy smokes.
Okay.
They can get e-cigarettes. You've heard about e-cigarettes being sold at retail stores around the state. We know you can get on Snapchat, Facebook, like we can probably order some here. We know that people have been ordering them to schools. And so that availability needs to change. The number of outlets where it's available needs to change for people to have an easier time quitting. We know that quitting is hard, but we can make it a little bit easier because obviously nicotine is highly addictive. But if it's not available everywhere, it'll make those quit attempts a little bit easier, knowing that you don't have to walk past the person selling it to you. And I'll just share the story. I was just thinking as I was coming up, the first focus group I did back in 2007 down in Queanbeyan, in the Eden Monero, the Venice of the Eden Monero. The discussion was, I'm going to walk out of this medical service and I know that there are 7 stores across the road there that will sell me tobacco. And I'm going to try and give up. If I was on crack or some other product and you made me walk past my crack dealer to go to the medical service, I'm guaranteed to fail. So how do we change that power balance, particularly when we know that people are taking up these products as youth and young people, children, and then having a lifelong addiction where they're trying to give up. But then we have a predatory industry, obviously marketing and selling a product and profiting at the expense of Australians' health and well-being. So how do we shift that?
How many people in the Indigenous community actually vape, do you think? What's the kind of percentage? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, you know, we heard about the household survey and other things, but unfortunately, we know that undercounts Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I think we've sort of heard about a third of people. I think that's conservative. I think people have tried it for sure. We've seen a real explosion since COVID, I think, where people, you know, public health and other places have been caught up with other everyday realities, and the ability to keep on top of the retail sector of, you know, a multi-million-dollar industry is very hard. And so I'm nervous about the next lots of national and, well, decent Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander data to come out. We expect to roll out a survey at the end of this year. But I suspect it's just over a third of people.
So a significant amount.
Yeah.
And is it throughout the community, or is it most of the young people? Is there a particular group, or how's it spread?
Yeah, I think definitely young people, youth and young people. Social media has obviously been a useful vehicle for people to be targeted with. I will also just give a couple of anecdotes, because I do get to travel around the state and hear stories, and so when we're sharing some of the national data, I work with big data generally, but it's really important to get the context right. And so what young people have been telling us is that they don't know how to quit, and actually taking up smoking provides barriers to them where they can quit. So at the moment when they're vaping, it's not an uncommon story that communities across the state have told me that they can vape anywhere. They can vape in the cinema, they can vape at home, they can sleep with it under their pillow, they can wake up at 3 a.m. and just suck on it and then get their hit and away they go. Whereas the reality is with smoking, you can't do that. You can't sit up in bed and spark up your cigarette and smoke without implications, without your parents knowing, without other things happening. And so I think that normalisation of it is one of those things we have to change. And so I actually just, when I'm talking about that, we'll touch on the access thing, the access point that I think we've heard about this morning, but throughout this hearing, is that it is available at every store, so why would you get a prescription? If it's easier just to go down to the convenience store and pick one up, or walk across the street, which I'm sure we could probably do, and pick up a product, then why would I go to the doctor and increase those barriers for me? Just a couple of thoughts.
And are you finding people in the Indigenous community are using vapes as a way of coming away from cigarettes, or is it something different? Like, who talk about who takes it up, but are they using it as a minimisation plan?
The vast majority, no. No, the vast majority of people are youth and young people that have never smoked.
And it's social, is it?
It's social. The messaging we're hearing from communities is it can't be that bad for us because it is available everywhere. Everyone's doing it, we'll give it a go. I think there are a number of people, and unfortunately I know when we're doing focus groups and interviews we hear these stories where people have been misled to think that this is a product that will help people quit, that, and I sort of mentioned those barriers, and I appreciate that everyone's quitting or switching experience might be different, but I've heard from countless people about the challenges they've faced using this product and then realising that they can use it everywhere, that there are no social barriers to it, and as a result they start to suck on this thing a lot more than they would if they were smoking. And then coming to me for asking advice around, okay, now how do I get off the vape? Like, I'm sucking on this vape constantly throughout the day, 24/7, not just my waking hours. So how do we provide those supports? How do we provide that structural support and also the social accountability? And when I talk about social accountability, I'm talking about we've done a great job in Australia around to some degree around denormalising tobacco. So you can't smoke in this parliament. I'm sure we could have at one point. You can't smoke in the aeroplanes, all those sorts of things. Vaping isn't quite like that. I know we have vape-free legislation, but the enforcement of that is challenging. The social enforcement of that is also challenging.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks, Doctor. We have the member for Orange online. Do you have any questions, Phil?
Oh, look, yeah, just briefly. Thank you, Associate Professor. Look, I just want to ask you a couple of questions. Does the public health messaging need to be nuanced to target Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to be more effective, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the reality is the implications are different. We know that the social determinants of health, those factors that put people at risk of tobacco use or vaping and other things are different. And so we also know that the answers lie with communities. We know, I've heard from communities over the last couple of years, like, how do we stop these vape stores popping up in our community? How do we stop them popping up throughout Western Sydney or wherever? And so I think engaging with those communities and hearing what they want and how they want it addressed is incredibly important to make sure that it's culturally safe. Like, cultural safety is safety, but also it resonates with those people. And I think similarly, we were talking about supports for youth and young people throughout today. Youth and young people know what will help them quit smoking or quit vaping, noting that, we've done a great job with denormalising that. Not a lot of young people are calling the quit line or going to see their GP to say, I've got an addiction issue. Yeah. So I think it's really important that they have a voice at the table in addressing those concerns so that they are used and used well, so that they're effective, sustainable. And that's exactly the same principle around our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities.
Yeah. You said earlier in your evidence there was a disproportionate use of smoking amongst Indigenous or vaping amongst Indigenous communities. Why do you think that is the case?
Oh, how long we got? Yeah.
About 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah, so I think I'll just go a quick context, because I think it's important and we tend to gloss over it. Obviously, commercial tobacco was systematically embedded throughout Australia through the colonial process, particularly among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people being paid in rations of, wow, sorry, I thought I put it on aeroplane mode. Anyway, so we know that it was systematically embedded through rations of flour, tea, sugar and tobacco. We also know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were excluded from the cash economy and paid in those rations. We know they were excluded from the Euro-Western academic education system. So, the civil rights movement in the 60s, 70s that saw the first Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people graduate from university and being able to go to university means that there is a significant difference in the way that people engage with Australian society. We know that there are risk factors for tobacco use. We know that those risk factors for tobacco use, like income, education, stable housing, experiences of racism, are consistent with risk factors for vaping. And we've got some research that we expect to come out hopefully shortly that highlights that they are consistent. Those patterns of addiction and other things are consistent. And so the way our society works as a system means that there are some areas for improvement, some gaps and some things that we need to address. So that's fundamentally the challenges we're facing with. Does that make sense?
Well, no worries. No further. Thanks, Associate Professor. No further questions from me, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Phil. Mr. Vo?
Thank you, Dr. Raglan, Maddox, for coming today and giving your evidence, especially with your wonderful work with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And my question is, how can school-based learning about vaping be improved or delivered in a more culturally appropriate way, since you have a lot of experience working with young people, and especially Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. I think we can probably learn some lessons from the Tackling Indigenous Smoking program that was implemented nationally around 2010, established in 2007, rolled out throughout from 2010, and basically it's locally driven processes to support communities to be nicotine free. And those, even around the table here, I'm sure we all know that our electorates are different, or your electorates are different. The Eden area is different to Sydney and other places. And so how we engage with those schools and communities should differ according to that environment, but we can consistently roll out that information education, try and understand the needs of communities. I think I guess the context at the moment is, regardless of where you live, there is retail availability and other things. So if we change that to denormalise it, then the job of the schools, parents, teachers becomes a lot easier, because there is that consistent messaging that this is a harmful product. At the moment, we know teachers, parents, principals are reaching out because it's so pervasive, and the messaging is complex, and the commercial environment undermines their ability to teach or to parent because it is normalised that there are people that are vaping everywhere. And so I think if we change that, then it becomes a lot easier for schools to say, here are the harms that we know about around vaping, here are the short-term harms. We might not necessarily know about all of the harms, but here's what we do know. And so I think that's a good starting place. We probably have also learnt a lot of lessons from tobacco control more broadly. And I will just touch on this briefly, we've known about the harms for tobacco for over 70 years. We had the US Surgeon General report come out in 1964, and we know it causes cancers, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, you name it. There's health implications for it. So I guess I just question how much more evidence do we need in that space? And I guess we can learn from that to make sure that we do things differently in this situation.
Thank you. And one way of denormalising smoking and vaping is, of course, to deal with compliance and enforcement. Do you think we should penalise the suppliers, the users, or both?
Yeah. So I don't want to go down the path of criminalising or penalising people with addiction issues. I think that's it's an unfair society if we sell this product and then penalise the people for using the product and who are dealing with a whole range of issues. So I want to be very clear that I don't support that, but do acknowledge that it's complex. I think we do absolutely need to enforce and create an environment that is conducive to health and needs to protect the health and well-being of all people, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including young people, including those generations that are going to walk this land after us and while we've all disappeared. So I think that retail environment needs to change. I think the predatory nature of it and the commercialisation of it is what's actually harming Australians.
And just follow, we need to support young people, especially the Indigenous and the Torres Strait Islanders, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Your submission states that more financial support is required to develop and deliver strategies and programs to support Indigenous people who are nicotine addicted to quit vaping. That was on page 6. How should this investment be targeted?
Yeah, I think like I was sort of saying, I think we've got probably a bit of a head start. We know that there are a number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people live everywhere. So I guess that's my starting point, including in Sydney. But also there are discrete communities across the state. And the answers do lie within, and we've seen with the Tackling Indigenous Smoking program that with appropriate investment and support that those communities can change the narrative that people have been talking about. We sort of hear that with even the term black market is problematic. I guess we're talking about the illicit market. So just trying to think about the way that that the industry is so predatory in attacking communities and Australians. So the communities that are being targeted know the answers to addressing those challenges. Sorry, that wasn't very clear. And so I think if we go back to that and we use the infrastructure that's already in place, we know there are a whole range of community-controlled health services, land councils that are doing works very successfully to reduce tobacco use. There's no reason why that wouldn't be different to reduce vaping use, in addition to the systems approach to reduce retail availability and other things. So I guess in summary, there's no silver bullet. We need a multi-pronged approach to reduce tobacco, vaping and other harmful products.
And so what are the risks associated with passive vaping? What action would you like the New South Wales government to take to ensure a high degree of compliance with smoke-free environment regulations?
Yeah, I think probably a couple of things. I guess one is, we're talking about it here. I know communities have talked about it, but increased communication, awareness. We know that communication campaigns are incredibly successful in generating those discussions. We know at the moment that there's mixed messaging going out through our communities through a whole range of sources, including social media, that essentially on one hand is promoting the product, and we've even probably, an example from today is we've heard very mixed messaging come out of the committee so far. So how do communities actually understand or differentiate that, especially when some people are differently resourced to promote their messages? So I think good, clear, consistent messaging, national, regional, local approaches to communicate clearly that we know that this product is harmful, and try and minimise second-hand vape exposure, similar to the way we've done it with commercial tobacco use.
Yep. And my last question, Chair, is so how can we ensure that the prescription-only model works properly for people trying to quit smoking, especially Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'll maybe just start with there are a whole range of evidence-based pharmaceuticals that the RACGP and others already provide advice on. I think we know that Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Services are doing a great job in supporting people to quit when they're coming in, but I think we can do better in terms of making those, patches, NRT, inhalators, the mist, all those sorts of products more accessible. Increased communications. We know that when we roll out communication campaigns about the harms of smoking, that there are increased calls to quit line, people go to the doctor. So how do we provide that environment to support people to make a quit attempt, but also have access to those evidence-based medicines to help them quit smoking, I think is really important. And we have a tobacco strategy that sort of details some of those strategies, and I think if we do all that, as well as change the retail environment so it isn't available so widely, we'll see tremendous success. And we can bring down the smoking rates and vaping rates at a greater rate than we've seen to date.
Thank you so much.
Just one question, if you don't mind. Just one question to you, Doctor. You talked about the predatory nature of the vaping industry and tobacco industry. Has the vaping industry targeted Indigenous communities? Have they targeted the Indigenous people?
Yeah, we know that Big Tobacco have sent out letters to Aboriginal medical services promoting their products.
Their vaping products, you mean?
Yeah, e-cigarette products, yep. So yes, in addition to, obviously we see retail stores popping up in Indigenous communities. One of the, I don't know if encouraging is the right word, but we had quite a big turnout. One of the interesting things around vaping is that when we go to, and people ask us to talk about smoking, they want to know about vaping. And so we've had a number of community consultations where communities have just said, now how do we get rid of these vape stores? Like, they just keep popping up. How come we have 8 stores here with a population of 4,000 people? And so I think we do need to see that change.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Associate Professor, for appearing before the committee today. You will be provided with a copy of the transcript of today's proceedings for any corrections. The committee staff will also email any questions taken on notice from today and any supplementary questions from the committee. So once again, thank you for your attendance today.
Thanks very much for having me.
The committee will now break and resume at 1:15 p.m. Thank you, members. Okay, we're right to go. I welcome our next witnesses, Mr. Martin Graham and Miss Megan Kelly. Thank you for appearing before the committee today to give evidence. Please note that the committee staff will be taking photos and videos during the hearing. The photos and videos may be used on the New South Wales Legislative Assembly social media pages. Please inform the committee should you not wish or object to having photos and videos taken. Now, can you please confirm that you have been issued with the committee's terms of reference and information about the standing orders that relate to the examination of the witnesses?
Yes,
You both have?
we have.
Yes. And do you have any questions relating to that information? Okay. As part of the formalities, can you please state your full name and capacity you are appearing today, and then take the oath or make an affirmation? If I can start with Ms. Kelly first.
Sure. So I'm Megan Kelly. I'm the Executive Director for Curriculum Reform with the Department of Education, and I do hereby affirm and declare that the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Graham.
Martin Graham, Deputy Secretary of Teaching, Learning and Student Wellbeing, Department of Education, and I do hereby affirm declare that the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Okay. Thank you. Would either of you like to make a short opening statement before we begin questions?
Yeah, I do have a very short statement, if that's right, for the committee. So I'd start by acknowledging that we're on Gadigal land today, and I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. So our area of the department oversees the drugs in schools policy, as well as drug education through the curriculum. So Ms Kelly chairs the department's drugs committee, and is responsible for our actions and responsible to the vaping round table, which was hosted by the department in November 2023 as part of an election commitment by the government to address the growing problem of vaping in primary schools and high schools. So we know vaping is having an impact on our students and members of our school communities. It's a significant issue raised by the community is how accessible those vapes are. We also know that vaping is a community issue which will not be solved by schools alone. Nicotine use and dependence through vaping impacts a student's ability to learn. So it impacts the ability to pay attention and behave appropriately in our classrooms and schools. We know it also affects their mood and their memory. So given those impacts, the department's commenced work on cessation support for young people alongside our prevention work. We also provide our teachers and leaders with curriculum resources and training to educate our students about the harms of vaping, explain how vapes are marketed towards and target young people, and teach the skills they need to make healthy choices regarding vapes. So we also work closely alongside our government partners such as New South Wales Health, non-government organisations including the Cancer Council of New South Wales, and so we take a well-coordinated approach to the issue of vaping. We also support schools to communicate with parents and carers about the harms of vapes, their own schools' policies and ways to support their children in relation to vaping. So in collaboration with the New South Wales PNC Federation, we delivered live webinars to increase community awareness of the harms of vaping and other practical advice for parents and carers. Specifically on the issue of vape detectors, at our vaping round table, detectors were strongly discouraged by most participants, as the evidence indicates that the systems deter vaping only when complemented with human interventions, including education and support for students to quit vaping, which are the things we're concentrating on. We believe the introduction by the Commonwealth of the reforms around vaping accessibility will go a long way to reducing access for our students and other members of the community. In conclusion, we're committed to working with our Commonwealth, state, non-government colleagues to eradicate vaping, support school communities, and to collectively help the health and wellbeing of our students.
Thank you. Ms Kelly, do you have anything further?
No, nothing further to that. Thank you.
We'll move to the question session. I might just start by asking the first couple of questions. So, first of all, is vaping education currently integrated into the primary and secondary school curriculum? Is it? So
certainly issues of drug use and dependency and so on is integrated into the PDHPE syllabus. Can you talk about how we do that?
Yes, please.
And it is done in an age-appropriate way, so making sure that it's addressing those developmental understandings of students and building on those skills over time. And then additional resources and support are also being added to that. So curriculum resources like teaching and learning materials, particularly around vaping, to support that curriculum focus that's already there.
And do you feel that's making a difference?
It's a good question to ask. I think over time we will understand the full impact of those resources. I think it is definitely giving students the information that they need about recognising the dangers, understanding those dangers, as Mr Graham also mentioned in terms of advertising, marketing, knowing that they're the target of that marketing, how to respond to peer pressure. So it is the curriculum focus, but it's also giving them those skills that they need to be able to manage the situations when they encounter them. So it's a broad approach that we take.
Yeah. Given how quickly, it's only 2007 vapes were invented, I think we've been much faster onto this than onto some previous things, and we've started with health, so we're using exactly the same messaging, the same materials. New South Wales has got comprehensive packages, particularly around high schools, and the National Wellbeing Student Hub actually uses the New South Wales materials. So, we've always got more to do, and particularly within schools, each individual community is different, but we think, we've made a pretty good start to it.
We've heard earlier evidence that if students knew what chemicals are actually in the vapes, it might discourage them for continuing because they simply don't know. It's just a peer pressure thing that they've engaged in. So does your curriculum go into educating the students about not just, drug and smoking being hazards, but that actually goes into why vaping should not be done because of these chemicals that they're inhaling? Does it go that far?
It certainly does. I might let Ms. Kelly give the detail, but from my perspective, reading through our materials, I learn a lot about the chemical compounds, and when you talk to kids in schools, they are way more educated on this than I think the rest of the community. They're being able to talk about the acetate in them. They can talk about the different compounds. So I think we have been a bit quicker.
And we have used the New South Wales Health campaign, which is called "Do You Know What You're Vaping?" To build some of our resources on. So yes, we are absolutely helping our students to understand the contents of vapes and then the effect of it on their health.
In relation to teachers, what professional development do teachers get to deliver vaping education modules?
Yeah, so there is quite a bit of professional learning that is available for teachers. So we've got things that are online, modules that they can work their way through, from understanding vaping and the knowledge that they need around, what vaping or what vapes are, to how to teach those materials, and then how to support students. Importantly, for those students who are vaping, how do you then support those students to access the health support that they require? So it is comprehensive. We've added to that recently this year, so there's new professional learning available for our teachers.
Thank you so much, Dr. McDermott.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for coming in today. Your evidence is really important to us, and certainly, myself and the member from Mount Druitt first were contacted by principals of our schools 5 or so years ago, and it started building bigger and bigger problem. So it's been put to us that it's a health crisis amongst youth in our schools. Would you agree with that?
I'd certainly think it's a rapidly growing health issue. I guess we'll leave it to the health people to define it by crisis. But it's certainly absolutely a health issue that's been identified in all schools, and we're absolutely approaching it as a health response.
Yeah. Okay, so your response is a health response, not a disciplinary response?
It's absolutely a health response, and so any, which is important. So if we do take any kind of action, because there's a lot of vaping going on, the direction is not just about the education for why you shouldn't vape, but also moving them onto cessation, so helping them to get off the vapes. That's a really important part of the health response.
So can you talk me through the process? So I'm a student or a group of students, they're socialising probably in the bathroom with the vapes, they get caught. What then happens? Talk me through the whole process.
Yeah, so the reason, the first part of the process is it's now absolutely clear in the student behaviour code that vaping is absolutely not permitted in school. And you think, well, why is that important? Often that behaviour code is put by schools perhaps in a diary or some other thing, or it's reinforced in assembly, or it's in a newsletter right at the beginning of school term. So those expectations are clear. So when the students are doing that, it's very clear that they're breaching the student behaviour code and that they're not meeting the expectations of the school. Now, we give principals a lot of discretion because it will depend. How old are the kids? Have they done this a lot before? What are the risks? And it's really around the risks. So the principal will say, what are the risks I'm managing here? Am I managing a group risk that there's this is going to expand to other kids?
So it's a risk model based on the policy of the department? Okay. Go on,
and so we clear to principals they do get discretion, but we've also been clear in our behaviour policy that vaping is something they should take seriously and they can take action for it. Now, if they have a particularly difficult situation and they need time to bring that under control, to bring in risk mitigation, that's the time at which you may consider something like a suspension. But there's no kind of automatic, if you vape, you're suspended, because it's, they might be the kids who need most to go to the counsellor because they know they've been trying to get them off and the parents are a bit, there's so many different circumstances. We give the principals the discretion to be able to put the risk management in place to minimise the risk of harm to other students or to staff.
And that's it. They're not referred to counselling. They're not
Oh no,
referred.
that's so.
They bring the
Part
parents
of that,
in.
part
Or
of
what?
that
Tell me
risk
the process.
So, well, that's why it's different for each school depending on
Okay.
what's happened. But the process could be that bring the parents in because it is a health issue, and we speak to the parents about do they need advice and support with getting the kids off the vapes. Often kids are vaping because of other underlying issues. So we know anxiety, eating disorders, things like that are often quite closely related to that behaviour. So we absolutely want to address that root cause. We're not a primary health provider. We do have counsellors in schools and so on, but they're not providing long, ongoing therapy.
Right.
So they might work with them. The other thing the principal might do is go, okay, we really need to hit those department vape resources. Let's get on the website and let's talk about what we're doing for, might be Year 8 that's a particular issue in, and we might use the PDHPE class as a time to talk about that in Year 8. So they might go individual student, group, whole school, depending on the circumstances.
Okay.
So it's not a neat, simple thing, but it's absolutely what is the risk, who is it to, what can I do about it?
Okay, and is it the same model for if they were caught smoking cigarettes?
Yep.
So they're identical?
Absolutely the same.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely
All
the same, taking the same.
Okay, so it was put to us today in evidence that that perhaps what you need to have within each school is a vaping area for those kids who are addicted to the nicotine. Would you agree with that?
No, it was the same
And why not?
It was the same discussion that was had about cigarettes, and so we're very clear, adults, children, contractors, there's no smoking and no vaping on any government school site. So and that's the same issues were discussed with smoking, and it's the same, if you start the grey zone of, we have a safe space, it just makes it too difficult for schools to manage that.
To manage it.
Yep.
But what about the welfare of the child?
We're absolutely concerned about the welfare of the child, but we believe there are ways we would rather, have medical advice about how to manage that addiction than have them bringing the vapes onto the school ground.
Okay.
But we know that is challenging. Yeah.
Okay. This discretion you should give to the principal and this risk-based approach, which is obviously what you're doing. Do they then report that to the education department, that they've found so many students that week, or what the process is?
Most of the data is local, but if there are incidents, we have an incident reporting system, and that is all logged centrally and comes through to the department.
Okay, so you have a database of not finding out incidents.
We have a database. It wouldn't, it wouldn't. I can't tell you it's got the fidelity of picking up every time someone's seen a vape. It might be reported as an illicit substance rather than particularly a vape. But we, so it's managed locally at the school level. But the reason we have all the resources is the health data is very clear. It's in every community. It's in every school. It's we don't need. It's the materials available to schools. The principals know best whether they're having an outbreak in their school.
But you're really not answering what I'm asking of you, right? And what I'm asking is what the whole process is. Now, I've been spoken with ad nauseum by principals of different schools in Western Sydney about the problems they've got with vaping, have for many years. And what I'm trying to say, what is the responsibility of the department? What do they do? Now, just saying, it's back to risk of the principal. No, I want you to tell me what happened so I know.
So in developing our new behaviour policy, the previous one didn't include vaping in it. And we've listened to those principals and we've worked with them. And so we've absolutely made it clear their authority. Some of them didn't know, I'm allowed to do anything about it, I'm not allowed to do anything. The behaviour policy is now very clear. You absolutely can include vaping as a serious thing to deal with. And if you needed to suspend a student, you're absolutely entitled to do that under that policy.
Right.
But it absolutely doesn't say that you have to. Because, of course, principals know their kids best.
Which is fair enough, and that makes a lot of sense. That makes
the
sense,
department's responsibility is also to provide that material, and we can provide you with the links. It is expert material with health. I've educated myself a lot just using our own department's materials. Absolutely on us to give them the tools they need, so their expert teachers can deliver that education. And I think that's something the department definitely does. We're now doing it for Australia because we're doing it quite effectively. School counselling and referral to health services for the cessation is the other really important thing. And they're the things that we have been doing, and I think they're starting to be a lot more effective.
Thank you for that answer. So if the committee asks you, can you give us some data about how many reports are coming back to the department, how much, say, one suburb is to another, or where the hotspots are, are you able to do that?
It would mainly be health data that would do that. We have incident data, but it's this trade-off between how much admin burden for the principal if we ask them to log every single little thing. But we certainly have enough of a sense that it's everywhere, and we need to do something about it everywhere.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I imagine you didn't mention this, but you would seize the vapes or the cigarettes or whatever other drug that gets caught.
Absolutely.
So you basically seize the vapes. Now, obviously, safe storing of these vapes is an issue. I've heard all kinds of reports also from my schools and my electorate regarding fires and other things like that. What's the process of storage? What's the process regarding safety of when they do seize these vapes?
Look, it is a challenge. I think it's a challenge like all kinds of e-waste, and it is unfortunately fairly localised how that's managed, because e-waste in particular is often managed through local councils and local, refuse collection contracts and so on. So yeah, we know it's not straightforward, but it's a similar problem to lithium batteries. We have lots of robots and things in schools now where we have that kind of issue as well. So
what is the discretion within each school to how they dispose of it?
We can give them professional advice, but unfortunately it's not as simple as the department doesn't have a statewide collection system for.
That's the type of thing I'm asking you.
We don't have a statewide collection system because it's localised, and that's partly because they're kind of. The refuse system is localised in New South Wales, so that does it's a challenge.
So the the schools have to deal with it themselves, correct?
But with advice from the department, we can help.
You want to say something?
No, I was just going to say that we would advise them to contact their local councils, essentially.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
And that's what they do.
Yeah, there's a challenge.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's all the stupid questions I've got. Thanks.
Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks Ms. Megan Kelly and Mr. Martin Graham for coming here today. Your evidence is going to be very important, part of the Department of Education, and a lot of the users in this case are young people, and a lot of them are in high school, so your evidence is very important. Thank you for coming today. Just want to ask, how prevalent is vaping in New South Wales schools, and how is this detracting from teaching, from the teachers teaching and the students learning, and also to our young people looking to the future?
Well, I think that the health data is about 1 in 6, but we know that it's not consistently 1 in 6 across the state, and certainly within a school. We know there'll be whole classes who aren't vaping, and then there are whole kind of social groups who are. And the students are the students are probably clearest with us about how that works. When you speak to students, they know how that's happening. We know the kind of effects of particularly the nicotine. We know about the kind of, they're not often marketed as having it, but we know that they do have it. And the head spins and the other medical effects are real. It does, at its most acute, can distract from the class in that students will have medical episodes and might need to go to the sick bay or have some other assistance if they have trouble breathing. That's at its most extreme. That's not incredibly common, but it certainly can happen. Certainly they're not vaping in class, but we would be worried about any kind of absenteeism that was maybe driven by kids needing to vape elsewhere. So that can also be an issue as well. So we know that it is pervasive in communities, and as long as it's in communities, we're going to be dealing with it in schools. We don't want to see them, obviously, education is a fantastic place in that we have everybody, and we know we've got them for these precious years, and we can give them the tools, not just to deal with vaping, but to deal with whatever next comes along when they leave school. And we think that's one of the reasons why we don't just tell them about vapes, we tell them all about peer pressure, marketing, all that stuff, how to resist it, because then something else comes along that we haven't thought of yet, they'll be equipped to deal with it.
Yeah, thanks so much. And you mentioned about peer pressure.
Yeah.
My question is, are you aware of peer-led vaping prevention programs being trialled in New South Wales schools, for example, engaging older students to become vaping prevention advocates? And what is your view of this approach?
So we're very excited by those approaches. We've got an arrangement with Western Sydney Health, where we're working to develop a professional learning package where Year 10 students will be working to help inform their Year 7, particularly as they're coming into secondary school, inform them about vaping and so on. I was lucky enough to be in our building in Parramatta, and I just happened to be walking past the room where we had health and students from government and non-government schools, and they were helping to work with health about what would be influential on kids. So what is influential on their peers? What is social media? What does TikTok look like? And they were starting to develop that program together. And I think that particularly how quick vaping's taken off, a lot of the teachers, there was no vapes when they were in school. So we are very excited by the peer thing. We still think absolutely Department of Health, professors, proper, evidence-based stuff is really important. But if we can build on that and use peer coaching as well, we think that's an addition to that model would be really powerful. And the kids themselves are really excited by it. That's what I mean. I think compared to smoking, the students are way ahead of us on this one, which is really heartening.
And I think in addition to that point, the way we deal with e-cigarettes is different to smoking in some ways. And so student voice here is really important for us to understand what's going to work in this situation to be able to better address it, because it is a different problem to solve. Cigarettes were seen as dirty and it was a bad habit, whereas this is a bit, vaping is seen to be a bit cool. And so it is understanding what will it be that makes that difference, and how do we use our students to be able to influence that with their younger peers is an important piece of addressing this issue.
Thank you so much. And so how are the schools supporting? We're talking about the peers here, but here we're talking about the parents. How are schools supporting parents and carers to have informed conversations with their children about the risk of vaping?
So we've statewide, we've done things like have webinars with the Federation of P&C, so they can bring parents in. We had Dr. Kerry Chant at it. We also had a young person who'd recently given up vaping. So it was really helpful to talk to parents about, well, what is it that would influence young people around that. But we're also, schools are obviously, people, particularly we knew during COVID, people look to their local school as a source of authority. So we provide schools with information for their newsletters and so on, so they can help educate the community about what they're doing in schools about vaping, and can help them talk to their kids.
Yeah, because it is important. Parents, it's a partnership between schools and parents, and in many instances, parents aren't aware of the dangers themselves of vaping. So, they're learning along the way, and they're looking out. They're asking for that support to be able to explain it to their children and to protect their children. So, we take very seriously that role in providing that education for our parents as much as we are for our students.
And is it like it's quite difficult to talk to the parents and the students, but so how do you approach it? Like, say, how do you approach the issue? Like, is it more like educational or information awareness, or is it there to help the child or to punish the child? How do you approach situations like that?
So it's informational, so they've got the same information that their kids have. But yeah, that's the biggest question from parents was, how do I start to talk to my kids about this? And it does differ, obviously, with the age and so on. One of the things we're aware of, and we're really age sensitive, is, one of the risks is if you just start flooding everyone with vaping information in year 5, are we going to get uptake of vaping because we've suddenly started talking about it when the kids might not previously have been talking about it? So we work with parents about when's an age appropriate way to talk about it, what you might talk about, what's a non-threatening way to talk about it. Some of the advice we give on every issue is the classic, talk about it in the car, when everyone's facing forward and you don't have to have the confronting, looking into each other's eyes. And some of those are really simple techniques, but they're the powerful things that were shared during the P&C webinar.
And depending upon the context too, you might manage a conversation with a parent in a different way. If it's a student who is vaping, then you'd invite the parents in and have those conversations. And so I think it does depend upon the situation. So there's that general support, but then there's more targeted support as well when it's needed.
Yeah, and my last question is a teacher, a friend of mine, said vaping detectors in the toilets are not that useful. Do you think they're useful, or are there more useful ways of detecting or supervising the children not to use vapes or e-cigarettes?
The strong feedback we had from the round table, and that was young people, principals, health professionals, everybody, was they're just not a magic solution. So they might detect vaping, but you also need to have adults going around and checking, which you need to have anyway. And it kind of gave people a false sense of security. Oh, I've done something about it. But in fact, it's kind of a really minor thing. We would never say no. If a principal had a really specific situation, they're absolutely welcome to do that, and we'd help support them to do that. But yeah, the other messaging was, of course, you just get them damaged. People flush them down the toilets. It's just like, it just creates an extra layer of problem. And the one that was brought to us by the young people and the health professionals was suddenly a trend to try and hold the smoke in your lungs to avoid the detector, which is just, that's just making things way worse. So, yeah, in the end, our advice was not a wide rollout of detectors, but if a school wants to use them and they have a really specific need and a place, it might be a supervision issue, then we'll support them with that. Yeah, so your teacher friend was absolutely spot on.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
No more
Tree.
questions.
We have the member for Orange online, I think. You there, Phil?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, up here. Can you see and hear me both?
We can hear you, can't see you.
Oh, righto. Okay. Maybe that's a good thing. Hey, listen, both of you, I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions, and feel free. I'll direct it at you, Martin, but Megan, if you feel more appropriate for you to answer, by all means answer it. Are either of you aware of any vaping-related safety incidents that occurred at any of your schools, either kids being hospitalised or having to be treated by ambulance, or any other injuries that have been sustained whilst they've been vaping at school?
I don't have specific instances, but I certainly know that it has happened. I don't have kids' names, but I certainly have heard of incidents. I think particularly kids who are vulnerable, perhaps had asthma and so on. And I guess there's always the question of, was it the vapes and so on? So I guess I don't have a, exact clinical, diagnosis.
Are you able to take on notice and provide a written response to this committee, Mr. Gray?
Yeah, I can see what we've got on that. But yeah, as I said, sometimes the incident data won't exactly identify that, but I can certainly see what we've got.
Well, we don't need children's names.
No,
just number
that.
of incidences.
Yeah.
Surely there'd be a report at the school of an incident like that, wouldn't there?
The question might be, did they refer to it as a vaping incident? Was it something else? But we'll certainly look into that data.
Thank you. The roundtable discussion that you said was had, I think, last year, the vaping roundtable. What were the recommendations or findings that came from that?
I might
there were quite a few recommendations that came out of that. Many of those actions were already underway, and so it's just ensuring that we're delivering on those. One of those recommendations was to bring the education and the resources and support down to a younger age group. So we had been looking at high school students specifically, so bringing it down to our years 5 and 6 students, so that work is underway. Development of a guide for our teachers, so we've already got a whole lot of advice, but consolidating that into a guide that they can use. The additional professional learning, which has already gone live. Linking our resources and support to the latest health campaign, so that work is underway.
Sorry, Mrs. Kelly, are you able to provide perhaps this committee, I'm not saying now, but in the next 7 days, a copy of those recommendations that have
or you can take that on notice.
Yeah, and they are published on our website, so they're publicly available now, but we can, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, and thank you both for appearing before.
Can I just ask one more question?
Yeah, one more question.
Sorry, it's always me. I'm always doing that to the chair. One last question. So, obviously, there's been a lot of work you're dealing with, obviously tobacco, but also with vaping from the department. Just, you probably can't answer this, but if you can, how much educators' time or resources do you think are spent at each school dealing with this vape problem?
It would vary.
Give me anecdotal. Just give me your opinion.
I couldn't quantify it. I would say, look, some of it would be we've displaced concerns about cigarettes onto it, so not additional time, just a different concern.
Yeah.
What we would say is what we're really passionate about is in providing all this support. We'd like to say there's been no time having to think, what kind of resources am I going to need for this age group? How am I going to do it? Because we've provided them. So I guess we do know it takes time. We're passionate about reducing admin load for teachers, reducing the cognitive load for them. And so, that's what we would say is like actually, we're trying to minimise any additional time. They're going to have PDHBE classes anyway. This kind of stuff's in the curriculum, but how do we give them the vape-specific elements so they don't have to develop all that themselves?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So I probably haven't answered your question.
No, it kind of is because it's a
that's
question.
It would be different for different roles in a school too.
Yeah.
So if you're a head teacher welfare, then you might be spending a bit more time on it than a classroom teacher, for example. Which is part of why it's hard to quantify because it looks different for different roles.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Once again, thank you both for appearing before the committee today. You will be provided with a copy of the transcript of today's proceedings for corrections. The committee staff will also email any questions taken on notice from today and any supplementary questions from the committee. Thank you for your attendance.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Committee staff will now organise the next witnesses. Thank you. Okay. Thank you all for your attendance, and I welcome our next witnesses, Assistant Commissioner Scott Cook, APM, Dr. Kerry Chant, Ms. Gemma Broderick, and Professor Tracy O'Brien. Thank you for appearing before the committee today to give evidence. Please note that the committee staff will be taking photos and videos during the hearing. The photos and videos may be used on the New South Wales Legislative Assembly social media pages. Please inform the committee staff if you object to having photos and videos taken. Now, can you please confirm in turn if you've been issued with the committee's terms of reference and information about the standing orders that relate to the examination of witnesses? And we'll just go, Ms. Gemma, yes?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes,
And
thank you.
yes. Thank you so much. And do either of you have any questions about this information?
No.
No.
Okay. As part of the formalities, please first state your full name and the capacity you are appearing today, and then take the oath or make an affirmation. And we'll start with Ms. Gemma.
Gemma Broderick. I'm Acting Executive Director of Legal and Regulatory Services at the Ministry of Health, and I hereby affirm and declare that the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
I'm Professor Tracy O'Brien. I'm the New South Wales Chief Cancer Officer and the Chief Executive Officer of the Cancer Institute, New South Wales. I'm also a conjoint professor in paediatrics and child health at UNSW. I do affirm and declare the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Kerry Chant. I'm the Chief Health Officer and Deputy Secretary for Population and Public Health, New South Wales Health, and I, Kerry Chant, do hereby affirm and declare that the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you so much. Assistant Commissioner.
Thank you. Scott Cook, Assistant Commissioner of Police, attached to the State Intelligence Command. I, Scott Cook, swear that the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you so much. Do either of you or all of you have a short opening statement before we begin questions?
We've not, from New South Wales Health, we've not prepared a statement.
Sure.
We really wanted to allow the committee to have the full time for
Sure.
questions.
No, thank you.
No, okay. So we'll move to questions from the committee. And I'll start with a couple of questions. First to Health. So according to the recent media reports, New South Wales Health launched only 12 prosecutions for illegal vapes sold over 18 months. What's preventing New South Wales Health from securing more convictions?
So I would respond by that to say that our regulatory activity's got a number of components. So first of all, in a number of those cases, we will have seized the product, and so one of our intents of our compliance activity is to remove product from sale, and that in itself has a burden to the has an impact on the retailers. We also have the ability to initiate PIN offences, so that's almost like an on-the-spot fine for some offences, and in others we lodge activity in terms of the formal legal processes. There does take a time for us to lodge those cases, and we work with our colleagues in legal services to ensure that the prosecutions are robust and support our officers take them through the court system.
Just a follow-up on that, we've heard earlier evidence today of a retailer set up in a candy shop near opposite the school. I think it's been in the media, that particular retailer, yet no action's been taken in relation to that retailer.
So if the committee would like to give me the details of that retailer, we will be happy to initiate compliance activity. We have a system where we receive intelligence from members of the public and from other sources. We have an ability to go to our website, complain, and we use that intelligence. We'll obviously prioritise things that are concerning, particularly if there's concerns around sale of the product to minors, those types of issues. So very happy to follow up that premise, and I would just like to ask all retailers to act responsibly at this time.
Yeah, what's the process for the public if the public identify a particular retailer selling to minors? Is there a process that the public can go through?
If they go to our website, there is a link, and they can make a complaint online. That's probably the most efficient and effective way for them to complain.
Yeah, but if going online is too difficult, is there like
there is actually a number as well.
Is?
And they can also ring their local public health unit, which is a 1-800 number. And I'm happy to provide those details to the committee and for the committee to disseminate that.
But how could that information be given to the public? Remember the campaign Dob a litter person and that sort of stuff? There's nothing available in that sphere of the illegal retailers operating that people can dob a retailer.
We have put that in some of our social media posts and our media about how to make a complaint, but I take it on board that you're reflecting that we haven't done that adequately enough to reach the group. Yeah. So we will take that on board and reflect on how we can get those complaints to the community and to the different segments of the community.
All right. Dr. Chant, you are aware that the federal government is currently in the process of doing legislation in relation to implementing, controls over vaping probably later this year. Who will be responsible for ensuring compliance of the retail? Will it be the state government's responsibility once those federal legislations are in place?
There are a number of regulators, and so various entities will have a key role in different components. So, for instance, the Australian Border Force will be tasked with maintaining the vigilance at the border and ensuring product does not breach those requirements. The Therapeutic Goods Administrator is another regulator, and they will also have a focus, and we're working closely with the Therapeutic Goods Administration. And in terms of the retail setting, that would be certainly New South Wales Health would be the lead in doing that, but we do acknowledge that from time to time we do work in coordination with police and our other regulators in coordinated activity, and really acknowledge the assistance police provide on when the circumstances require that support from police. So,
yeah, that's my next leading to my next question. When raids are to occur on a particular retailer, so you got information about a particular retailer that's selling illegal vapes, New South Wales is the lead. New South Wales Health is the lead agency that does the raid, or is it the police?
So it's New South Wales Health is the lead agency, and we have information sharing arrangements which we're just consolidating through a memorandum of understanding to share particular intelligence that might highlight any risks associated with our regulatory activities. But in the main, we would initiate that regulatory activity. What we also have done is coordinated action with Therapeutic Goods Administration. So there might be things that the Therapeutic Goods Administration intelligence that they have, that they might work in concert with us. Again, we look at the roles and responsibilities, and we look at what we can contribute. But we are very clear that there's a number of regulatory agencies that have a role in this achieving a reduction in the use of e-vapes. And our officers also are focused on illicit tobacco. So when they're going into the vape shops, they're also focused on loose leaf tobacco product, nicotine pouches, single sale of single cigarettes, sale of cigarettes to minors, and other offences in relation to tobacco. Because overall, we're interested in supporting the community to reduce both tobacco and e-cigarette use.
And Assistant Commissioner, what role do you think the police have in relation to the enforcement of illegal vapes in retailers? So is it just a supporting agency to health, or do you have a specific role?
No, we support health. Health is a regulator. At the Commonwealth level, Border Force is responsible for the border with AFP. We support those agencies. And at a Commonwealth level, at a regulation level, the Therapeutic Goods Administration group. And so we work with all of those partners to support them. Our primary interest in terms of any of this is relating to serious and organised crime matters,
Right.
where there could be some overlap with a particular retail outlet. Then we might provide an additional interest into that for other purposes. But in terms of vaping, in terms of tobacco generally, we support the regulator, which is health.
So do you do your own intelligence, or do you rely on the intelligence that health is providing to you?
Primarily, in terms of vaping, we would rely on the Therapeutic Goods Administration, Border Force and New South Wales Health in providing us with intelligence. Those frameworks are in place for that to occur. We would generally only be interested in that if we found some other criminality associated with it or some organised crime involvement in that. However, we also have a mechanism to provide those other agencies with limited information as well within the bounds of the law to support what they may be doing in terms of their targeting and their approach to their issues.
Thank you so much, Dr. McDermott.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all very much for appearing today. It's nice to see you some again, although I know. So we'll start with the Assistant Commissioner, Scott, Cook rather. Talk to me about organised crime in New South Wales and the impact that it has on the illicit market of e-cigarettes. How big is the market for them?
At the moment, I don't know that it's very big at all. They've only just been prohibited at the Commonwealth level. I anticipate, based on that action by the Commonwealth, in due course we will end up with some sort of illicit market. It appears any time there's prohibition, there's always, and there's a demand, there's always an illicit market that's generated. The quantity and size of that market's unknown. It may not grow to be a big market if the demand level or the demand side of the equation can be addressed properly, because organised crime is basically motivated by cash and money. And so if there's no demand for a particular product, in this case e-cigarettes, then it's unlikely that that illicit market will grow too big. If there's strong demand and that demand's not arrested early on, then potentially it could increase to a substantial level. Other tobacco products which have had import restrictions for some time, there's already an illicit market around that. But by comparison, it's nowhere near the prohibited drugs illicit markets.
All right, so you're saying that organised crime really doesn't have much of a presence in vaping industry at the moment.
At this
it's
point in time.
basically pretty legal. So where, if children want to go and buy it, where do they buy it from?
They can buy it from any tobacco retailer.
Yeah, okay. So,
well, can I just correct?
Certainly.
Certainly. I just want to make it clear that it's not lawful to sell nicotine-containing vapes in a retail setting, and there are also prohibitions on the sale to young people. So,
yes.
whilst
that doesn't
it is,
stop.
No,
Chant, I say that.
I understand that.
But we know the marketing of these products are without the word nicotine on them. That there's been a complete change to focus on children by the evidence that's come before us. So we've been given evidence over the last few months that we've had record importation levels of vapes, of e-cigarettes from China, millions and millions. Right? In the last few weeks, it's been record low. It dropped 93% as we're now going towards regulation at a federal level. Where do you think all those vapes are going? They're obviously going into storage somewhere, but is it, Assistant Commissioner, it's not going to organised crime?
Well, I think the Commonwealth approached this in a staged approach. So they set a particular date for the ceasing of importations, and then they allowed a certain period of time for retailers to then on-sell or sell legally, the ones they're legally able to sell those vapes. And so I think only on the 1st of March, and I'm sure Dr. Chant will correct me if I'm wrong, but the 1st of March was the point in time where that should have stopped. So there may well be stockpiles of vapes still. But at this point in time, I think retailers would be taking quite a bit of a risk to be selling them, given that the Commonwealth has now prohibited those sales.
So I remember some years ago for a government of Parliament, I worked with a task force, a federal police and a state-based task force on legal tobacco. At that time, you could bring in a lot of tobacco, millions of dollars worth, and get next to no penalty for it. Do you know what the penalties are now if you do that with vapes, or what it might be in the future for the legal vapes?
My recollection of the Commonwealth legislation is 7 years.
7 years, so it's picked up. So it's similar to what it is now to tobacco.
I think that's correct. I think the Commonwealth would be best to provide you with that detail, but that's my understanding, yes.
All right, thank you. Dr. Chant, I'll go across to you and to your team from New South Wales Health. I've just talked about stockpiling of millions of product. Is there any evidence, or have you heard of anything where that stockpile is going to, or where those millions of vapes are going to?
I am aware that the regulators are aware of those issues, and obviously some of the things that are in the public domain have been, I think earlier this year with the Blitz, we did, the Therapeutic Goods Administration did announce that they targeted a number of warehouses and secured products. So clearly that looking for warehouses or other large places where stock may be held is part of the regulatory and compliance activity, but I don't have any other detail other than to note that there has been some focus on warehouses that have contained, or wholesalers or storage facilities where they've failed to comply with the requirements under the Commonwealth legislation.
Okay, so if your inspectors from health find a stockpile, or they find illicit illicit vapes, what's the process then? They seize it?
They seize it.
They seize it? Then it has to be taken away for testing, or?
No. So it depends on the circumstances, but they will seize, where it contains nicotine, or where they have reasonable suspicion. I'll probably get the terminology legally wrong but my colleague Gemma can correct me. But if they have a reasonable basis according to our Act, they can seize the product. That product is then, in some circumstances, it might be tested. In other circumstances, we know that it contains nicotine. That product is then, there's an opportunity for the retailer to provide contrary evidence in a period. And then we get approval often from the retailers. So often the retailers will be approving for us to destroy that product immediately where it's clearly containing nicotine. We then dispose of that product using appropriate contractors. We store it. We have storage facilities, and then we secure storage facilities that comply with the appropriate regulatory requirements, and then we will discard and destroy that product.
Okay. And how many inspectors do you have doing this, or how many employees in health are doing this type of compliance work?
So we have a centralised core of inspectors, and that is around sort of 10. Can give the committee the exact sort of numbers. We also have public health unit staff, particularly in our regions, that work alongside of us, particularly on Blitz activity. So it is a matrix of both the centralised core of inspectors plus also our public health units in various districts and our regional public health units that work with us on compliance activity.
Okay, so they go and they visit the retailers, do they, in vaping stores?
That's right. So we have a program of activities. Sometimes our inspectors from the centre will go out and complement the staff. We're very aware of the communication techniques across the suppliers, the retail premises. And so what we have tended to do in terms of our modus of operandi is to try and target concurrently in a geographical location so that people are not given preemptive warning and can secure the stock in an inaccessible way. So we do try and do planned activity. We have a planned program of activity, and obviously when new intelligence comes in, we're able to deviate or respond to those needs, but we do have a planned program of work across the state.
Is there a particular area of the state where a lot more of this work is being done because there's a greater demand or a greater problem?
We do try and service the whole state. So I'm also very pleased to say that there has been a lot of compliance activity done in our regional areas. So I would say that we don't prioritise one area over another, but we do act on intelligence. And when our partners such as Border Force or TGA have new evidence or new insights that we feel will yield a greater outcome, we can modify our program of work to take those opportunities for greater seizures and greater regulatory impact of our activities.
Can you tell us of a particular area, say in Sydney, that has that, or just across the state?
Look, I think we would have to say that it is not that difficult to get nicotine-containing vapes. So this is a widespread issue. We are having to do, until the Commonwealth legislation fully takes effect, our regulatory activity is just a tip of the iceberg. We are working very, very hard. We're seizing lots of products. We're acting with our regulatory partners. We are doing everything we can, but obviously the border restrictions will have an impact. And anecdotally, and I wouldn't want to oversell this because it's the sense of our inspectors, is that has had an impact already on the supply. But clearly the reforms, should they pass the Commonwealth government's processes, will really cement, make compliance much easier, because basically retail premises will not be able to sell e-cigarettes.
Great. That kind of brings me into my segue. My next question, I'm asking both yourself and the Assistant Commissioner. The evidence put to us that when these federal regulations come through, when they do, it'll drive these products into an underground market, into a black market, and increase the amount of involvement of organised crime. Would you agree with that? Do you think that's what will happen?
I would defer to the police, who would know those criminal behaviours better.
Yeah, so in some respects or some capacity, I think that's likely. That's the standard occurrence for when we create prohibition. It creates illicit markets to some degree. And as I said earlier, how that will play out in terms of e-cigarettes is, in my view, highly dependent on what we do about demand. If we address demand through education and other methods, so that there's not that drive for the illegal vapes, then the market, organised crime is not going to invest in a market that's not going to make the money. So I think the jury's out on that, and I don't know which way it will go. If we do nothing about demand, and it would follow any other illicit commodity, and I imagine that there would be a black market that develops as a result of that.
We do a lot of work for tobacco. They still bring in millions of dollars of chop and other things, and it's used in shishas and all kinds of things, right? So that demand is still there.
Correct.
So wouldn't you just equate that to be the similar type of problem we have with vaping?
Yeah, I guess the open question is about who's using vapes, and if it's predominantly children, where there's an opportunity to intervene before hitting the criminal justice system, we would encourage that as a method, because that may well arrest the demand for vapes. In terms of other tobacco products, that ship sailed. There's already a black market for those other tobacco products, and it's high yield, low risk in terms of organised crime, but it doesn't compare to the illicit drug market by comparison, black market by comparison. So I think it's a matter of perspective around these things, and I think given that vapes have only just been prohibited at the border, I don't think that we can foresee how that will end up. It will follow the same trajectory as other illicit commodities, unless something is done about demand early.
Okay, thank you.
The market at the moment is actually an illicit market by and large, because nicotine containing vapes are in fact illegal unless they're supplied by a medical pathway, so by a medical practitioner or nurse practitioner. So the only legal vapes that should be sold in retail premises, in fact, should not have nicotine. But that is not necessarily what we are seeing. So the market at the moment is, in fact, to a large degree, an illicit market.
That's right. We have a large illicit market.
Yes,
that's all
correct.
the evidence keeps on showing
Yes.
to us. So the question is, this is the $1 million question is now, what's been the barriers to actually increase the amount of compliance enforcement, and what can we as a government, what can we recommend that this government does to assist health, to New South Wales Health, to actually increase the amount of enforcement?
So the current landscape is such that we have basically there's been so many access points for this. The uptake of young people, the demand has been great. People are able to access it through various routes, and that's driven economic gain from this product. To some extent, the Commonwealth legislation, which will come into effect, will make it very clean that retail premises will not be able to sell this product, which means that regulatory activity will be very simplified, because these premises, it's not a question of whether they know that the product contains nicotine. It will be clear that they're conducting unlawful activities. So the regulatory process will be very streamlined, because at the moment we have to, in some circumstances, demonstrate an awareness of nicotine in the product to affect the prosecution. I have written, as Chief Health Officer, to all of the retailers, telling them that they should not rely on any assertions that the product does not contain nicotine. I think it's been very clear in the media that on the benefit of doubt, they should assume that the product they've been on selling contains nicotine. But the legal processes are that we have to prove those elements of the offence. So clearly the current regulatory environment isn't robust enough for us to achieve the compliance we need, and clearly we are looking forward to the Commonwealth's legislation, which will then move this to a prescription model.
And the Commonwealth reforms in when they banned the import of vapes also assist, because they had the same problem in trying to differentiate between the non-nicotine vapes versus the nicotine vapes. So covering the field in effect in relation to importation, you would expect, we would hope, will assist by at least making compliance easier and detection easier.
Okay. So last question. We have asked the industry to be here. We've asked the vaping industry to appear. They've refused a number of occasions, including the tobacco industry. So I'm just wondering what engagement you have. You've just said you've written to the retail industry. Do they openly engage with you on these issues, or is it like us being stonewalled?
Look, I can confirm. I'd have to take on notice what engagement that the teams have done in speaking to the retailer associations. All I can confirm to the committee is that I've written, looking at on at least a couple of occasions, to retailers highlighting the issue directly to them.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have the member for Orange online. Phil, are you there?
I'm here. Can you see me and hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you, mate.
Right.
That's fine. They can hear you. Yeah.
That's all right. Look, thank you and welcome to the hearing. I know we've heard from Dr. Chant before in evidence in relation to this matter, but I wanted to, I suppose, I just heard the chair in his question. I think it was to Ms. Broderick. And I just want to clarify something, if I heard it correctly. Was it 12 enforcements or prosecutions? Was that the number that I heard that the chair asked in relation to proceedings that have been commenced for matters involving vapes or illegal e-cigarettes?
That was the number referred to by the chair, but I think the actual figure that I have is, I think it's 40 defendants for both nicotine and for e-cigarettes for 2023.
Yes.
So it's not quite, it's more than 12, but that 40 defendants includes both for convictions in relation to both cigarettes and nicotine vapes.
So they're people who have appeared before the court and have been convicted, is that right? Okay.
Just clarify that number. 45? 40?
40 defendants. can differ how you count, because as I said, sometimes they're charged and convicted of both offences relating to nicotine and for e-cigarettes. We can get you the formal figures on notice, and we can get back to you on that.
Yeah, if you can take that on
And
notice.
could you tell us what the result, like the penalty was as well, when you come back to us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Phil?
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I'll continue. Yeah. Over what period of time are we talking about that those prosecutions were, is that on a calendar year or?
Yes, the
or
calendar year for 2023.
Okay. And do you know how many penalty infringement notices or PINs have been issued during that time?
I'd take that on notice as well, and can get back to you on it. It'd be more than that, but I'll take that on notice.
And cautions and confiscations? Do you have that information?
We can take that.
I mean, we could say, I can provide the committee the details of the conversation. So in 2023, New South Wales health inspectors conducted over 3,000 inspections. We seized around 431,000 nicotine vapes and e-liquids with an estimated street value of 13.7 million, and we seized more than 4.8 million cigarettes and 1,700 kilograms of other illegal tobacco products with an estimated street value of over 5.8 million.
Right. And sorry, Dr. Chant, I missed the number. The sound was dropping in and out when I was listening to you answer some other questions. But in terms of the number of inspectors that you have, health inspectors, you said there was a centralised core of inspectors, but how many are there across the state? Was it 12? Did I hear you say 12?
Not across the state. So just in terms of not wanting to mislead you, there is a centralised team, and I'll just get the updated numbers because we're just in the process of recruiting some additional staff for that team. So I just want to give the committee the correct number, but it is a small team centrally. And then we also work with our colleagues, environmental health officers located in our public health units that complement the regulatory teams that we use.
Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
The Minister recently announced 12 new inspectors.
So that he announced additional inspectors for pharmaceutical services,
right?
As well as some additional tobacco. And in addition to that, we've also recently recruited some we're in the process of increasing further the number.
Okay, thank you.
But it is
the number. Sorry, Dr. Chan. Continue. Sorry.
But just to say, it is a small team that's working with its colleagues across the state to undertake the regulatory activity, but we're also working very closely with the other regulatory authorities, such as Therapeutic Goods Administration.
So how big is the small team?
I think I just have to check the numbers, but it's in the order of 10.
Okay. To cover the whole state?
No, that's the central core team, and that team then will work with our colleagues in local health districts, environmental health officers, and we will usually put together a mixed team that then does regulatory activity according to a program of work.
Is it fair to say that those environmental health officers, is that one per LHD?
It varies by local health district, and a number of people can be authorised under the Act and assist in aspects of the regulatory work. So in some districts it will be more than one environmental health officer that's involved in the activity.
Because obviously in the country where I am, and the tyranny of distance can often make it very hard for enforcement officers to get around their patch. It seems to me that you're grossly under-resourced.
Look,
Would you agree with that?
I think the compliance activity, I just want to acknowledge the teams working hard and acknowledge the rural teams. They're working very diligently to do as much as they can, but at the moment the size of the problem is quite onerous.
It is worth noting also that we have been given evidence by a number of people who have come before us who are very supportive of the work that they're doing and saying how good a great job they are doing, but they've all said they're under-resourced.
I'm not making any criticism, Dr. Chant, and I don't expect you to say it, but it would appear, at least from my own opinion, that you guys, especially the inspectors, are grossly under-resourced to tackle the problem across New South Wales. I'll make that as a comment. I don't expect you to agree or disagree, but I think based on the numbers that you've given us, that will appear evident. I wanted to ask some questions also now of Assistant Commissioner Cook. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Do the police need further powers or resources, whether search and seizure powers or other powers to... I appreciate health is the main combat agency in relation to this, but do police also need additional powers of either search or seizure or other areas that could facilitate or help police do their job in relation to, or easier to do their job in relation to these issues?
No, not at all. Police have sufficient powers for their purposes and their charter. I think perhaps, as I said earlier, looking at non-criminal approaches to this in the first instance is probably a preferable way to go. We notice that there's no actual licensing scheme in New South Wales for tobacco sellers, and by that I mean actually having to hold a licence and maintain a licence, and something that health, for example, could take away if they weren't complying. That doesn't exist at this point in time, and I think that's a challenge for health. So I think we would throw our weight behind some reform in accordance with health needs so that they can undertake their role more effectively. In terms of policing, we have sufficient search and seizure powers. We can use Commonwealth powers. The Commonwealth legislation in regards to search and seizure we can use. So the police are not seeking any additional any powers.
Thank you. Thank you, Assistant Commissioner. I've got no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'll move to Member for Cabramatta, Mr. Vo.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kerry Chant and Gemma, Broderick, and Professor Tracy O'Brien, and Assistant Commissioner Scott Cook for coming in today. And your evidence is going to be very important because New South Wales Health and New South Wales Police are going to play a very important role in reducing the harm and usage of e-cigarettes. My question is, what research is New South Wales, this is to the New South Wales Health, what research is New South Wales Health undertaking into the dangers of passive vaping?
So in terms of the effects into passive vaping, we're not undertaking directed research, but we're very much surveying the international literature on the passive effects of exposure to what we'd call secondhand vape. We're also reviewing the evidence just around particle exposure in general and looking at anything that can give us some guidance to what those impacts would be. We obviously know that in relation to tobacco, the information around secondhand smoke in terms of those impacts were a long time coming, but we are also looking at very much the basic research as well. So no specifically funded research. It's going to be generated in all sorts of different forms across the world. But did you want to add anything,
No,
Tracy?
I think that covers that.
Thank you. And so what impact, this is due to New South Wales Health, what impact does vaping have on adolescent mental health?
I've had the privilege to discuss this with a number of our colleagues in youth and adolescent physicians, and I think we're really concerned about the impact of nicotine on the developing brain. We're concerned around that, the fact that if someone is anxious or depressed or using it for any other reasons, then it can actually exacerbate those conditions. And you get this sort of cycle where the young person is smoking it is vaping to relieve stress, but then when they withdraw, they become addicted to the nicotine, and then when they try and stop the nicotine, they actually get all the symptoms of anxiety and feeling anxious. So we actually think it's not an appropriate way for young people. We need to support young people's mental health and well-being, and that these products are really very counterproductive. And I've really been very chastened by the stories that young people have told us about how the vapes, and that when they become, how rapidly they become addicted, and how surprised they are at how quickly they become addicted to it, and how it often takes a very maybe a health, in one case, someone was admitted to almost, I think, intensive care, or having something else that really makes them reflect on how the e-vaping has almost controlled their life or had this impact. And it's often been that sort of aha moment. And I've got to say that the young people that we've used in our campaigns, or the young people that have come forward as advocates, are very powerful in telling the story about how they would not recommend this to other young people. And I've really been very privileged to hear young people really wanting to support other young people not get addicted to vapes. And Tracy, did you want to sort of
No, I just would echo that, and the work that's been done by New South Wales Cancer Institute takes responsibility for the social marketing, the behaviour change campaigns. A lot of formative research goes into that. We spend a lot of time with young people, hearing from young people, both vapers and non-vapers, around the harms that they're concerned about, what it is that's motivating them to quit, so that we can share that information. And the behaviour change campaign that is currently in market at the moment, the Every Vape is a Hit to Your Health campaign, is the voice of young people influencing other young people. It's incredibly powerful. And as Kerry said, those stories are sobering. What is also sobering is that young people really do want to quit as well, and all of the information in the campaign, both evaluation, pre-concept and also post, is that they do want to quit. They want tools to quit. They understand how powerful the drug of nicotine is, how damaging that can be, as well as the other health harms that we've heard across the inquiry on people's healths from vaping.
How long has the campaign been going?
There's been 3 phases to campaigns that have been run through the Institute. This current campaign is phase 3. This started in January of this year. It was launched in an event by the Deputy Premier and the Minister of Health, and Dr. Chant and I were there, as well as 2 passionate young advocates who appear on one of the campaigns. So that campaign will run across this year. It's a number of features to the campaign. There is runs through all of the social channels. It's directly targeted towards 14 to 24-year-olds. There is the only thing that you may see is stuff at a cinema, unless you're frequenting TikTok or other channels that young people.
It's very sad.
Young people. It's also influencers involved in that campaign. And I think very important to say is it's not just a public health campaign. It's connected to then tools and further information that points young people towards cessation tools as well. It's connected to websites and lots of information that's provided around the options for cessation as well for young people.
And I'm sorry, how are you assessing? Like, what point will you know how successful the campaign is? How are you doing that?
Yeah, so there's a formal process to doing that. The last campaign, phase 2 of the campaign, ran through 2022 to 2023. That was Do You Know What Your Vaping campaign is about, and that was targeted towards 14 to 17-year-olds, and that looked to expose the truths around the harms of vaping and the contents of vape, but also really look towards empowering young people to quit vaping or not take up vaping as well, to address some of those social norms around vaping that we were seeing rapidly emerge for it becoming a normalised behaviour. So that campaign has been evaluated and hasn't been published yet, but I can share, and I'm happy to provide some evidence to the committee afterwards, that that campaign reached the target audience. We know that above the projected averages, and among the vapers who saw the campaign, 71% indicated that they intended to try and quit from seeing the campaign, and those that don't vape, over 90% of them, the campaign actually reinforced not vaping as well. And there's a formal evaluation process and lots more questions from that. In the current campaign, what we do have is we test the formula, the final campaign product. We test it in a pre-launch with a number of young people, and that's been done with hundreds of young people, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, and we test that it's well understood and that it's likely to invoke behaviour change as well with that, and that's tested very, very favourably as well.
Sorry, Tree.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you for that. And during the hearing, especially today, we heard that e-cigarettes and vapes are not as harmful as tobacco, and it also could be beneficial to some people.
To youth, I think.
What are your views of it?
So I think New South Wales Health's position, and that's a position shared by the Cancer Institute, it's the best situation to neither vape nor smoke. Both are harmful for health. And actually the comparison is probably a little misleading because they're very different products, and we're yet to know the full, we haven't had a sufficient follow-up for the long-term health effects of vapes, but we know that from some of the basic science sort of studies that they do cause irritation, scarring, things that are precursors to poor lung health in a longer term. We know about the other impacts that I've described on neurodevelopment, also on pregnancy. So that we certainly wouldn't describe them as a safe product, but we do recognise that we're open to the role of a prescribed prescription in limited circumstances, but in terms of the hierarchy of evidence, the evidence is stronger for other methods of quit, including other nicotine replacement therapies. And so whilst it may be useful to consider this in the armoury of for a clinician, it will be on a very case-by-case basis and in very specific circumstances where that benefit and risk is really weighed up carefully. It's not a product that we would encourage ubiquitous use. But Tracy, would you like to?
Yeah, look, I could speak specifically to the risks of cancer. I think that there was evidence this morning that the risk may be less or there'd be no risk of cancer. And I think what is clear is there is no definitive either population or individual-based evidence that vaping causes cancer. I'd take caution to stopping at a full stop after that sentence, simply because we don't have the duration of time to be able to prove that. Tobacco smoking took decades to prove that it caused cancer. It wasn't until the 1960s that we knew that tobacco smoking caused lung cancer, and then several decades after that we now know that 15 other cancers apart from lung cancer are caused by tobacco smoking as well. We do know that there are 200 odd chemicals contained within vapes, and many of those chemicals are known to cause cancer. I believe in some of the submissions and this morning some evidence was given that the quantities of those chemicals are much less and therefore less likely to cause cancer. Again, I caution that both as the Chief Cancer Officer but also as a paediatric cancer specialist, our understanding of cancer really has evolved with genetics and the biology of cancer, and we know that cancer is almost like a fingerprint. Each of us are unique. It's not necessarily a dose response. If you're exposed to X number of chemicals, you will develop cancer in X time. Some people may develop cancer much earlier than other people, so it's not a straightforward equation from that point of view. So I have concerns about the health impacts in terms of cancer of the products that are currently being exposed to young people.
And so as access to vapes in retail settings become more restricted, are people likely to turn to tobacco or black market nicotine products, you think?
So that's, I suppose in terms of our approach, we're very keen to manage illicit tobacco products as well, as we know that the approach to tobacco, which is the plain packaging, taxation, are important barriers to entry, maintains. So part of our approach to actually reducing the harms of tobacco is to make sure we maintain a very strong vigilance in relation to loose leaf tobacco, sales of single cigarettes, and any other related products. So it is about a combined approach because we want to reduce the harms of tobacco smoking in the population, and there's still much more work to be done there as well. We have made great inroads, but we are now, we still have a lot of disparity in terms of smoking rates in some of our communities that we need to tackle, and we need to tackle the challenge of e-cigarettes as well.
And could the proposed flavour restrictions deter, because I think they were restricted to just 2 flavours, tobacco and mint.
That's the federal
federal approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would this deter e-cigarette users from accessing therapeutic vapes through a prescription pathway in favour of the black market product, do you think?
Personally, I see that if someone is wanting to cease tobacco, there really needs to be a strong bond and a therapeutic relationship with a primary care provider that supports them through that journey. That the normal route would be a trial of a number of different strategies that suit the person and conventional NRT. And then if there was an assessment of risk, that these products would be used. I think in the context of a therapeutic approach, the use of mint or some other, having 2 choices is probably inappropriate for that paradigm. I think it's too early to speculate, but I really see that the prescribing of e-cigarettes in a therapeutic pathway allows for that, the best outcomes for the patients. And what we would like to see is cessation. We wouldn't want to see dual use, which is also a pattern in the data showing that that many people are maintaining dual use of products. Could I just also go back? The team have provided me with the fact that we've got 11 officers currently in the tobacco team in the ministry, so apologies to that one person I'd not counted. We have over 50 authorised inspectors in our local health districts. They're the partners that we do work with. And we're currently looking for additional 3 contractor positions to boost us over this period and make sure that we have a full complement going ahead for the continued high level of compliance activity.
Thank you for clarifying.
Can I just...
Yeah,
sorry,
I've got a few more
mate.
questions for
Please.
New South Wales Police, if that's okay. I'd like to ask Assistant Commissioner Scott Cook, so how does regional and rural New South Wales compare with metropolitan areas in terms of the extent of illegal retail supply of e-cigarettes and tobacco? And are police in regional and rural communities sufficiently resourced to carry out enforcement actions against these businesses?
So the first point I'd make is that police are not required to carry out enforcement activity. That's the responsibility of health. And in those areas, police have been very conscious and very willing to assist health. And in fact, I think most of the enforcement activity undertaken by health has been in those regional areas, and police have supported those operations. So it's not a great impost on police, but it sometimes is difficult to arrange timings for police depending on other workloads. But we've undertaken to health to support them in their efforts, and wherever we can practically do that, we will do that and continue to do that.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure whether this question was asked before, but so how much money is organised crime making from illegal vapes?
We don't know the answer to that question.
Okay,
If I can just jump in, the reason for that question, we've had earlier evidence that suggested that all the imports that are coming in are done by organised crime, and they're the ones that are selling those products to the retailers.
Well,
so he's saying majority of vapes are controlled by organised crime, but your evidence is contrary to that.
Yeah, we would disagree with that. The vape market up until recently was supplied on a legal basis.
Yeah.
And so in other countries where these vapes are coming from, they're all legal.
Yeah.
That's legal, not illegal. And so there's no need for an illicit market from those, or an organised crime market,
Yeah.
to drive that into Australia. But recently, with the change, that may change as well.
Yeah.
But we haven't seen that yet.
And like say, are the current penalties for illegal selling e-cigarettes and e-cigarettes containing nicotine adequate? If not, how would you like to see them change?
So I think the Minister has flagged that consequent on the Commonwealth legislation, once that finally passes through and we're clear on the parameters of that, that will certainly increase penalties significantly. And we are looking at other minor modifications that the Minister's asked us to look at in terms of the penalties, but also things like disposal costs and other range. So in responding to the Commonwealth legislation, we are taking a look over all our tobacco legislation and looking at if there are ways that we can streamline to facilitate the compliance.
So do you foresee legislation changes once the Commonwealth has acted in New South Wales?
We foresee that there'll be a tidy-up required, and Gemma's probably the best person to talk to that.
It's something that we're considering, and we'll need to see what happens with the Commonwealth legislation, how it passes, and then how best to actually implement it in New South Wales, and whether or not we need some complementary legislation, or whether or not we need to also just increase generally regulatory provisions in order to assist with compliance and enforcement.
True, do you have any more?
I've got last one, to both, New South Wales Health and Police. So what needs to happen for the prescription model to work effectively? What role do you see the New South Wales government play in ensuring compliance with that pathway?
So what we, I think, have a role in is providing evidence. We see that cessation therapy and overall preventive health care should be delivered primarily by primary care. So clearly partnering effectively with primary care to support evidence-based, increasing evidence-based knowledge of the use of smoking cessation, and to make sure that they're aware of the different options for them, the different evidence-based underpinning them. And I've got to say we've been running a number of webinars with our RACGP colleagues, and I think you attended one earlier this Monday. But we've run a series of that. So supporting general practice to really know the evidence so that they can provide the best evidence to their patients. I think then there is regulatory activity. We are also working closely with our pharmacist colleagues, again, for them to, we see that pharmacists are often a point of contact that community might ask, and again, working with pharmacy groups to ensure that there's a high level of knowledge of the evidence and processes in the pharmacy sector. We will also, as part of the previous announcement of governments, have increasing our pharmaceutical regulatory activity, because obviously as the product coming in is largely pharmaceutical in nature, and we will want to make sure that that's not diverted. And so our pharmaceutical services area has a regulatory function in working with wholesalers and others to make sure that those controls are in place. So our focus at the moment is really education and support to those people that would be the prescribers, and also working with the community to make sure that they understand the evidence base and are open, know where to go to access help and support. And then as we progress through the depending if the Commonwealth legislation comes into effect, we understand that we'll also have an increased role in the pharmaceutical regulatory compliance area.
And if I could just add, the other parts of the education that we're working on is education modules for different touch points within the health system, for opportunities to identify those that smoke or vape, and connecting to vape services. And we're also working at the Institute to develop education programs for other youth workers outside of New South Wales Health who benefit from that education as well.
Does Assistant Commissioner have anything else to say?
I don't have anything to say beyond what I've previously said, and that is, I think a licensing scheme would be useful for the government to consider. That places an onus on retailers and others, whether they're chemists or retailers or whoever it ends up being, distributing these things to do the right thing, not the wrong thing, because there's some risk of them losing their business and their livelihood. And I think keeping it within that civil space, in terms of civil penalty space, is probably the first step I would suggest. The last thing we want to see as police is criminalisation of vaping, particularly for young people. It'll bring them in contact with a criminal justice system they will never get out of. So I think I would suggest treading very carefully around using the criminal justice system, and I would perhaps focus as much as possible on the civil penalty system.
Just all pharmacists, like once the Commonwealth reforms come in, the only people that will actually be able to sell any types of vapes will in fact be really the pharmacists. So they'll have to either be supplied on prescription by a pharmacist or direct supply by a doctor or nurse practitioner. Pharmacists themselves all have to already be approved. So there is a scheme, the Pharmacy Council of New South Wales actually approves all community pharmacies.
And that'll make it easier for enforcement, because once that's in place...
Well, that will be the legal pathway.
Yeah,
so
that's
what,
in place.
Yes.
Then any retailer, whether it's got nicotine, no nicotine...
Correct. They shouldn't be selling
illegal.
it.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a very cut and dry offence if they are selling.
So if...
Yeah,
done?
I'm done.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
let's
Dr.
go back to
McDermott.
compliance. Thanks for that. With tobacco, okay, if you're caught smoking in a restricted area, or someone is selling tobacco that haven't got a license to do that, they can be fined by a health inspector, obviously, of the Department of Health, correct? What about a council equivalent?
The Smoke-Free Environment Act, so I think there's two different offences you're talking about in terms of the... so if you're looking at smoking in a smoke-free environment, I think, Gemma, we're the enforcers of the Smoke-Free Environment Act.
Which also includes vaping. So you can't, in the same places that you can't smoke, you can't vape.
I understand that.
Yep.
Let's just stay at tobacco. Just a minute. I'll explain why in a moment.
Yep.
So if you're smoking a cigarette or a vape in a restricted area where they're not allowed to do that, who can fine that person?
New South Wales Health.
New South Wales.
Inspector.
Can council inspector do it?
They sometimes, as I understand it, have their own bylaws. And I think transport might have its own regulation as well relating to smoking, say, on transport stops. So it can differ, but generally speaking, it would be New South Wales Health.
But there is some under bylaws for council officers.
That's I understand, yes.
What about New South Wales Police?
I think we have some capacity on trains and transport, but I'm not sure about the other particular places.
So potentially for tobacco, and there appears some vapes, they can be fined by all three groups. Okay. With illicit sale of vapes, when it comes in finally, right? Who can actually seize those products? Just health?
So this is something that we will need to consider if the Commonwealth legislation passes. So the Commonwealth legislation is an amendment to their Therapeutic Goods Act. I think the expectation is, well, the states and territories will need to work together with the Commonwealth about who's actually going to enforce it. You would generally expect that the Commonwealth would be enforcing more around the border, so trying to stop the border, and then the retail supply would come back to the states and territories. But how that's actually going to work, it is in the TGA Act. I think we are looking and considering whether or not it's actually better to have some kind of complementary legislation within New South Wales legislation to ease enforcement. So that will need to be considered. That none of the Commonwealth legislation though relates to where people vape. So
no, it's fine. Let's go back to the retailers.
Yeah, the retailers, yes.
So who, at the moment, right, if you have an illicit product, right, a vape, you can be basically seized and fined by health.
Yes.
And police are also authorised officers
That's
under
my
the
next
poisons.
question. Okay, so police can do that as well. They can seize the product and issue a fine.
Police are authorised under, my understanding is all police officers are authorised under the Poisons
Yes.
Act.
So the arrangements in place at the moment, the Therapeutic Goods Act kind of sets the general requirements. So nicotine is a Schedule 4 substance.
Yep.
It can generally be only prescribed or supplied by a medical practitioner or nurse practitioner or a pharmacist on prescription. And then the enforcement of the Poisons and Therapeutic Goods Act, officers within New South Wales Health are authorised officers. New South Wales Police are all authorised officers as well. In practice, although police can correct me, but they don't actually get involved. They would get involved in some of the medicines that are more sort of illegal. So some of the steroid type products and the like, or peptides, they may have more of involvement where there's a more of an illicit market. And what would happen though, if the Commonwealth Legislation Act passes, it wouldn't be in our poisons legislation, it would be in the Commonwealth Therapeutic Goods Act.
Yes. Yep.
So the intent, as I understand it, for the Commonwealth is for them to authorise officers of the states and territories to enforce the Commonwealth legislation and the Commonwealth TGA Act. And so that's one option. Another option that we are considering is whether or not it's actually better to think about we put something within our own framework, which is more readily understood, I think, by officers, and to kind of mirror almost the Commonwealth provisions.
So do you think that with, I know that you've given us the numbers of how many inspectors health has, and it amazes me the amount of work they've done with such small numbers, and it's a real credit to them. Is it worth expanding the power up to so New South Wales Police can also start doing more of this work? So they can do more seizures, they can do more work other than just supporting health.
That question me?
It can be.
Yeah, so New South Wales Police has significantly other higher priorities than doing enforcement work for vapes. Notwithstanding that, we have sufficient, as I said earlier, we have sufficient powers to do seizures. Where there's that overlap with organised crime, New South Wales Police definitely has an interest. In those circumstances would be available and will contribute. And in fact, in some circumstances would lead efforts to curb unlawful supply. However, in terms of a regulatory approach to do inspections or things like that, vaping would not be a priority for New South Wales Police, given other priorities.
Yeah, I understand you say it's not a priority, but that's not really your call. It'll be what the government suggests is a priority, and I do know what you're saying. But you go back to a lot of theories about what they should be focusing on, and I accept what you've just said, but the priority should be what the community expects the priority should be. And the fact that children as young as 11 are getting addicted because they're being sold vapes illegally and there's not being enough enforcement about that needs to be seriously considered.
Well, I agree with that.
But I take that on board when there's other more heinous crimes than that need to be dealt with, and there's maybe not enough police.
And to be fair, I think if that's the government's position, then health should be resourced to do that properly.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you all for your contribution today. It's been very informative. You will be provided with a copy of the transcript of today's proceedings for corrections, and the committee staff will also email you any supplementary questions that you might need to respond to. That concludes our public hearing for today. So thank you all once again for your attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.